Hello beautiful people. Welcome to God of Fiction. In today's episode, we explore, what if Gringotts revealed Harry was the owner of Diagon Alley and he banned the order from entering? Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Reading of Blood and Gold. The letter arrived by Goblin Courier, which should have been Harry's first clue that something extraordinary was happening. He was sitting on the edge of his bed at number 4, Privet Drive, staring at the wall. He'd been staring at that wall for 3 days. The wallpaper had a pattern of tiny blue flowers that repeated every 14 inches, he'd counted, and if he stared long enough, the flowers blurred into something that didn't look like the veil in the Department of Mysteries. That was the goal, anyway. Don't think about the veil. Don't think about Sirius falling. Don't think about Bellatrix's laugh or Dumbledore's sad eyes or the prophecy rattling around in his skull like a marble in a tin can. Neither can live while the other survives. He wasn't doing a great job of not thinking about it. The crack of apparition outside his window made him flinch. His wand was in his hand before the sound finished, but what appeared on the front lawn of number 4 wasn't a Death Eater or an Order member. It was a goblin. 3 feet tall, wearing armor that looked like it had been forged from liquid shadow, holding a scroll sealed with the Gringotts crest. Harry watched from the window as Uncle Vernon opened the front door, took one look at the goblin, and made a sound like a kettle reaching boil. "We don't want any, whatever you're selling, this is a respectable, I am not selling anything, human," the goblin said, and his voice carried the particular disdain that goblins reserved for people they considered beneath them, which was everyone. "I carry a summons for Harry James Potter. Gringotts business. Time sensitive. You will fetch him or I will enter your dwelling. Choose." Harry was already coming down the stairs. Vernon's face had gone the color of an overripe plum. "Now see here, you little, I'm here," Harry said, stepping around his uncle. The goblin looked up at him, and something shifted in those dark, clever eyes. Something Harry couldn't quite read. "What's this about?" The goblin held out the scroll. "You are summoned to Gringotts Bank for an emergency inheritance review and will reading, triggered by the death of Sirius Orion Black, named godfather and blood-adopted kin. Your presence is required within 24 hours or the bank will consider the matter forfeit and all unclaimed assets will revert to secondary beneficiaries." The name hit Harry like a physical blow. He took the scroll with fingers that had gone numb. "I'm not allowed to leave," he said, more to himself than the goblin. Dumbledore said, "Gringotts does not answer to Albus Dumbledore," the goblin said flatly. "Gringotts answers to Gringotts. The summons includes a legal portkey that will bypass any ward, any restriction, any magical guardian's prohibition. You need only break the seal." Harry looked down at the scroll in his hands. The wax seal glinted gold in the weak afternoon sunlight. "When?" he asked. "Now would be preferable. The director does not enjoy waiting." "The director?" The goblin bared his teeth. It took Harry a moment to realize it was a smile. "This matter goes to the top, Mr. Potter. Break the seal when you're ready." Vernon was sputtering behind him. Harry didn't even glance back. He cracked the seal. The hook behind his navel yanked him forward and the world spun, Privet Drive vanishing, the goblin's sharp-toothed grin the last thing he saw, and then his feet slammed into marble so hard his knees buckled. He caught himself on a desk. A very large, very ornate desk, behind which sat the largest goblin Harry had ever seen. The office was cavernous, carved from living rock, the walls studded with gemstones that pulsed with a faint inner light. Gold filigree ran along the ceiling in patterns that seemed to move when Harry wasn't looking directly at them. There were no windows. The air smelled of metal and old magic and something deeper, earthier, the bones of the world. "Harry James Potter," the goblin behind the desk said. His voice was like gravel being ground between millstones. "Sit." Harry sat. The chair was sized for a human, which meant they'd been expecting him. He realized his wand was still in his hand and didn't put it away. "I am Director Ragnarok," the goblin said. I run Gringotts. I have run Gringotts for 147 years. In that time, I have dealt with every manner of wizard, fools, geniuses, tyrants, saints, and everything between. I tell you this so that you understand, I do not waste my time. The fact that you are sitting in my office, in my chair, looking at me with that bewildered expression on your face, should tell you that what we are about to discuss is of extraordinary significance. Okay, Harry said, because he didn't know what else to say. Ragnarok studied him for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a stone basin, shallow, wide, filled with something that looked like liquid mercury. Before we begin the will reading, there is the matter of your inheritance audit. It is long overdue. By goblin law, it should have been conducted when you turned 11. It was delayed. Delayed by who? By your magical guardian. Albus Dumbledore. Harry's jaw tightened. Dumbledore is my magical guardian. He appointed himself as such the night your parents died. There was no legal challenge. There was no one left to challenge it. Ragnarok's eyes glittered. He has used that authority to make a number of decisions regarding your accounts. We protested. Repeatedly. He cited wartime necessity and the Wysengramot's emergency provisions. We were overruled. The way Ragnarok said overruled made it sound like he'd been chewing on the word for 15 years and it still tasted like poison. What decisions? Harry asked. We will get to that. First, the audit requires blood verification. 3 drops in the basin. It will confirm your identity and reveal all titles, properties, vaults, and legal entitlements linked to your bloodline. Harry looked at the basin. And if I refuse? Then you walk out of this office with nothing, and Sirius Black's last wishes go unheard. I would not recommend it. Harry rolled up his sleeve. Ragnarok produced a knife, goblin silver, inscribed with runes, and made a small, precise cut across Harry's palm. 3 drops of blood fell into the mercury-like liquid. The cut healed instantly, leaving no mark. The liquid in the basin churned. It turned gold, then black, then gold again. Light erupted from the surface, not gentle light, but aggressive light, the kind that demanded attention, and began forming words in the air above the basin. Ragnarok leaned forward. Then his eyes went wide. In 147 years, Harry suspected that didn't happen often. The words hung in the air like burning script: Harry James Potter, heir and lord of the most ancient and noble house of Potter, heir and lord of the most ancient and noble house of Black, by blood adoption and will of Sirius Oran Black, vaults, Potter Family Vault, 710, Potter Trust Vault, 687, Black Family Vault, 711, properties, Potter Manor, unplottable, Wales, 12, Grimmauld Place, London, cottage at Godric's Hollow, ruined, and, Harry stopped breathing. Diagon Alley, London. Full property deed. All buildings, land, and subleases. Transferred to House Potter by the Ollivander Potter Compact, 1612. Held in trust by Gringotts since 1981. What? Harry said. Ragnarok was reading the floating text with an expression that had shifted from surprise to something far more dangerous. Satisfaction. Well, the director said softly. That explains a great deal. I own Diagon Alley. The land beneath it. The buildings upon it. Every lease agreement for every shop from Ollivander's to the Leaky Cauldron's back entrance. The deed has been sitting in your family vault for over 400 years. It was part of a compact between your ancestor, Hardwin Potter, and the Ollivander family, a land grant in exchange for exclusive wand crafting rights that expired 2 centuries ago, but the property deed did not revert. It simply stayed. Ragnarok's teeth showed. Your family's account managers over the centuries appear to have collected the lease payments quietly and reinvested them. The Potters were always clever about money. Quiet about it, too. No one outside this bank knew. Not even Dumbledore, it seems, or he would have, well. Would have what? Found a way to use it. As he has used everything else. Harry's mind was racing. He forced himself to focus. You said Dumbledore made decisions about my accounts. What decisions? Ragnarok pulled a thick folder from beneath his desk and opened it. Since November 1981, your magical guardian has authorized the following: annual withdrawals from your trust vault totaling approximately 40,000 galleons per year, directed to a fund labeled, Protection and Maintenance of the Asset. We believe this funded the blood wards at your relative's home, though the actual cost of maintaining such wards would be a fraction of that amount. The remainder went to an order of the Phoenix Operational Fund. Harry said nothing. His knuckles were white on the arms of the chair. Additionally, Ragnarok continued, he blocked all correspondence from Gringotts regarding your inheritance review, your property holdings, and your family vault access. He redirected your quarterly account statements to himself. He placed a magical proxy on your Wizengamot seats, both Potter and, as of 3 days ago, Black, voting in your name without your knowledge or consent. And he sealed your parents' will. He sealed my parents' will. Sealed it. By authority of his position as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. The will of James and Lily Potter has been under seal since November 3, 1981. No one has read it. Not even us. Harry stood up. The chair scraped back across the stone floor. Unseal it. We cannot. The seal is a Wizengamot. I am the Lord of House Potter. I am the Lord of House Black. I hold 2 seats on the Wizengamot. Unseal. My parents. Will. Ragnarok looked at him. Really looked at him, the way a jeweler examines a stone to determine its worth. Whatever he saw, it made him smile. Not the bared teeth threat display from before. An actual smile. There is, the director said, a provision in Goblin law that supersedes the Wizengamot seal authority, but only when invoked by a confirmed blood heir in the presence of the bank director. It has not been used in over 200 years. It will cause a significant diplomatic incident. Do I look like I care about a diplomatic incident? No, Ragnarok said. You do not. He reached into the folder and pulled out a scroll bound with black ribbon and stamped with the Wizengamot seal. He placed it on the desk between them. By the authority of Gringotts Bank, operating under the Treaty of 1407 which grants this institution sovereign jurisdiction over matters of inheritance, Director Ragnarok, unseal this document at the request of the confirmed blood heir. He pressed one long finger to the Wizengamot seal. It cracked. The ribbon fell away. The scroll unrolled itself. Harry read his parents while standing up, because he couldn't make himself sit back down. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were steady. The will was written in his mother's handwriting. He recognized it from the letter he'd found in Sirius's house, the same neat, slightly slanted script, the same way she crossed her T's with a little upward flick. He had to stop reading twice to press the heels of his hands against his eyes. The relevant portions were clear: guardianship of Harry James Potter shall pass to Sirius Orain Black. In the event that Sirius is unable to serve, guardianship shall pass to Alice and Frank Longbottom. In the event that neither party is able to serve, guardianship shall pass to Minerva McGonagall. Under no circumstances shall Harry be placed with Petunia and Vernon Dursley. We are explicit in this. Lily is explicit in this. They are not suitable guardians. This is not a request. This is a legal directive. All Potter properties, vaults, and holdings shall be held in trust by Gringotts until Harry reaches the age of 11, at which point he shall be informed of his full inheritance and given access to his trust vault. At the age of 15, he shall be given full access to the family vault and all associated properties. Magical guardianship shall not be assumed by any member of the Wizengamot, the Ministry of Magic, or any political body. This is also not a request. Harry set the will down on the desk. He put me with the Dursleys, he said. His voice was very calm. My parents said not to. They named Sirius. They named the Longbottoms. They named McGonagall. And Dumbledore put me with the Dursleys. Yes. And he sealed the will so no one would know. Yes. And he's been spending my money to fund his war effort while I wore my cousin's old clothes and slept in a cupboard. Ragnarok said nothing. But something in his expression shifted, a hardening, a recognition. Goblins understood what it meant to be stolen from. It was the deepest offense in their culture. Harry picked up the will, rolled it carefully, and placed it inside his jacket. Then he sat back down. Tell me about Sirius's will. Ragnarok opened a second scroll. This one was written in Sirius's scrawl, messy, energetic, with ink blots where he'd pressed too hard. Sirius Oran Black, last Lord of the House of Black, names you his sole heir. Everything. The vault, the properties, the title, the Wisengamot seat. There are personal bequests, gold to Remus Lupin, the motorbike to someone named Hagrid, a set of enchanted mirrors to the Weasley twins with a note that says, and I quote, "'cause maximum chaos." But the bulk of the estate, including Grimmauld Place, goes to you. Harry closed his eyes. For a moment, the grief surged up so hard he thought it would pull him under. Sirius, sitting in that dark house, writing this will. Knowing he might die. Making sure Harry would be taken care of. He opened his eyes. Grimmauld Place. That's where the Order of the Phoenix has their headquarters. It is. And I own it now. You do. And Diagon Alley. Also yours. Harry leaned back in the chair and looked up at the gem-studded ceiling. His mind was working in a way it hadn't worked in months, maybe years. The fog of grief and helplessness and managed existence was burning away, and what was left underneath was something sharper. Something that had been there all along, buried under the weight of everyone else's plans for him. Director Ragnarok, he said. I want to talk about wards. Ragnarok raised an eyebrow. Wards. Diagon Alley. Grimmauld Place. My properties. I want to know what kind of wards can be placed on them, who can be excluded, and how quickly it can be done. Goblin wards are the finest in the world. They can be keyed to exclude specific individuals, specific organizations, or specific magical signatures. They can be erected within hours. They are, I should note, significantly more expensive than standard wizard wards. I think we've established that money isn't a problem. Ragnarok's smile was back. The real one. What did you have in mind, Lord Potter? Harry thought about Dumbledore's office. The spinning silver instruments. The way the old man had looked at him after Sirius died, sad, yes, but also calculating. Already thinking about the next move. Already figuring out how to position his weapon for the next battle. He thought about Grimmauld Place, where the Order sat around a table making plans that they never told him about. Plans about him. Plans about the prophecy. Plans about when and where and how Harry Potter would be deployed. He thought about 5 years of being kept ignorant. Of being lied to. Of being told just enough to get himself nearly killed and never enough to actually protect himself. He thought about Sirius, reaching for him through the veil. I want every member of the Order of the Phoenix banned from Diagon Alley, Harry said. Every single one. And I want them out of Grimmauld Place by midnight tonight. Ragnarok didn't blink. That will cause considerable disruption. Good. Dumbledore will come to you. He will attempt to reason with you, persuade you, guilt you. He is very skilled at all three. I know. I've been on the receiving end for 5 years. The Ministry will become involved. There will be legal challenges. Can they overturn goblin wards on private property? No. The Treaty of 1407 is ironclad. We spent 400 years making certain of that. Then let them challenge whatever they want. Harry stood again, but this time it wasn't agitation driving him, it was purpose. I want the wards keyed to a list. I'll give you every name I know. Dumbledore, Moody, tonks, shacklebolt, the whole lot. If they try to cross the ward line into Diagon Alley, they bounce off. Hard. And the shopkeepers? The residents? The customers? Everyone else goes about their business as normal. This isn't about punishing ordinary people. This is about cutting off the people who've been controlling my life. Ragnock stood. For a goblin, the act of standing to address a wizard was almost unheard of. I will assemble a ward team. 20 of our best. The alley wards will be active before sunset. Grim old place. He paused. There are people living there. Order members. Give them until midnight. That's more warning than anyone ever gave me. And the leaseholders? The shopkeepers in the alley? Harry paused. This was the part that required thought, and he gave it thought. He wasn't angry at Flourish and Blots, or Madame Malkin, or the ice cream shop. They were just people running businesses. No changes. Their leases stand. Rents stay the same. I'll want to review the agreements eventually, but that can wait. Right now, the only thing that changes is who's allowed in and who isn't. The shopkeepers should know they have a new landlord, and that I'm not planning to make their lives difficult. And what about your own presence? Diagon Alley is a public space. If people learn you own it, let them learn. I'm done hiding. Ragnock pulled a heavy brass bell from his desk and rang it once. The sound was deep and resonant and seemed to vibrate in Harry's chest. Within seconds, the door opened and 3 goblins entered, 2 in the armor of Gringotts guards, 1 in the dark robes of what Harry guessed was a legal division. Ragnock spoke to them in gobbledygook, fast, sharp, commanding. Whatever more actions continue he said made all 3 goblins look at Harry with expressions ranging from surprise to something that bordered on glee. The legal goblin's eyes went wide, and he actually rubbed his hands together before catching himself. Griphook, Ragnock said, switching back to English, will serve as your personal account manager going forward. He requested the assignment. One of the armored goblins stepped forward, and Harry recognized him, the same goblin who'd taken him to his vault the very first time, 6 years ago. Griphook looked older, or maybe just more serious, though with goblins it was hard to tell. Mr. Potter, Griphook said. We've met. I remember. You took me to my vault when I was 11. You seemed annoyed that I asked questions about the dragon. I was annoyed that you asked obvious questions about the dragon. You've improved, I hope. Harry almost laughed. It felt strange, the muscles in his face resisting the expression after days of nothing but grief and staring at wallpaper. I'd like to think so. We shall see. Griphook turned to Ragnock and spoke briefly in gobbledygook. Ragnock nodded and waved a hand, and the other 2 goblins left the room at speed. The ward team is being assembled, Ragnock said. Now, there are additional matters. Your family vault. You've never seen it. I didn't know it existed until 20 minutes ago. It is considerable. The Potters were among the 5 wealthiest families in magical Britain. Combined with the Black Fortune, you are, as of this moment, the single wealthiest individual in the country. Wealthier than the Malfoys. Wealthier than the Ministry's discretionary fund. He paused to let that land. You have resources, Lord Potter. The question is whether you have the will to use them. Show me the vault. Griphook led him out of Ragnock's office and into the tunnels beneath Gringotts. The cart ride was as wild as Harry remembered, plunging through darkness, banking around corners at speeds that would have killed a muggle, but this time they went deeper. Much deeper. Past the level where his trust vault sat. Past the level of the Lestrange vault where he could hear something massive shifting in the darkness. Down and down until the air itself felt heavy with old magic and the walls of the tunnel were rough-hewn from bedrock that glittered with veins of raw gold. The cart stopped in front of a door that was unlike any vault door Harry had seen. It wasn't circular. It was tall, 12 feet at least, and shaped like an arch, carved from a single piece of obsidian. The Potter crest was worked into the stone in gold and silver, a griffin rampant holding a wand in one claw and a sword in the other. "Blood and magic," Griphook said. "Palm on the crest." Harry pressed his hand flat against the griffin. The stone was warm. The crest glowed, and the door dissolved like mist. He stepped inside and stopped. The vault was the size of a cathedral. That was the only comparison that worked. The ceiling vaulted up into darkness, and the floor stretched out before him in a cavern so large that the far wall was lost in shadow. Gold, mountains of it, literal mountains, filled the center of the space, but the gold was almost an afterthought compared to everything else. There were weapons on the walls. Swords, daggers, spears, a bow made of something that shimmered between silver and moonlight. There were shelves of books, hundreds of them, leather-bound, some so old the spines had worn smooth. There were cases of jewelry, not gaudy display pieces but working enchantments, rings and amulets and circlets that hummed with contained power. There were trunks stacked along one wall, each marked with dates going back centuries. There were portraits, sleeping figures in ornate frames, and Harry realized with a jolt that these were his ancestors. Potters going back generations, stored here instead of hung on walls that no longer existed. And in the very center, on a pedestal apart from everything else, there was a single scroll under glass. The Diagon Alley deed. "Bloody hell," Harry said. Griphook made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The trust vault you've been using holds approximately 50,000 galleons. This vault contains approximately 27 million. The Black Vault, which you also now control, contains another 19 million. There are also non-liquid assets, properties, investments, business stakes. The total valuation of your combined holdings is..." He consulted a small ledger he'd produced from his coat. "Conservatively, 74 million galleons." Harry walked forward slowly. He passed the gold and didn't touch it. He passed the weapons and the books, though his eyes lingered on those, and he promised himself he'd come back for them. He stopped in front of the portrait wall. A man with Harry's exact face, the same jaw, the same unruly black hair, but with brown eyes instead of green, was stirring in his frame. He blinked, focused, and looked down at Harry with an expression of pure astonishment. "Good Lord," the portrait said. "You look just like James." "Are you? You can't be Harry." "I'm Harry. I'm Charles. Your grandfather." The portrait's eyes were bright and sharp. "I died before you were born, but your father talked about you constantly before, well. Before." He peered at Harry more closely. "You have Lily's eyes. He always said you would." Harry's throat tightened. He pressed his hand against the frame, which was absurd. It was just paint and canvas and magic, but the portrait of Charles Potter pressed his painted hand against the other side and held it there. "I never got to see this vault," Harry said. "No one told me about any of it." Charles's expression darkened. "What do you mean, no one told you?" "The account manager should have, your guardian should have, James left explicit instructions. My magical guardian was Dumbledore. He sealed my parents' will and spent 15 years keeping me in the dark." The silence in the vault was absolute. Then every portrait on the wall woke up at once, and the noise was thunderous, dozens of Potters, spanning centuries, all shouting at the same time. Harry caught fragments, outrageous and the nerve and blood debt, and one very old portrait near the back who simply bellowed, "War," before being shushed by his neighbors. Charles raised a hand and the others quieted. He looked at Harry with an expression that was deeply familiar. It was the same look Harry saw in the mirror when he'd made a decision and nothing was going to change his mind. "What are you going to do about it, son?" "I've already started." He told them. All of it, the inheritance audit, the will, the Diagon Alley deed, the ban. The portraits listened in increasingly stunned silence, and when he finished, Charles Potter threw his head back and laughed. "Oh, Dumbledore's going to hate this." "Good. Your grandmother always said he was too clever for anyone's good," including his own. He straightened up in his frame. You'll need advisors. Not those order people, proper ones. People who understand money and law and politics. I'm working on it. And you'll need to learn what's in this vault. There are Potter family grimoires on those shelves, magic that isn't taught at Hogwarts, because it's ours. Battle magic, ward crafting, blood protections. Your family didn't become one of the most powerful houses in Britain by accident. Harry looked at the shelves of books, then back at his grandfather. I'll be back for those. Soon. Right now, I need to be in Diagon Alley when the wards go up. Go, Charles said. Make some noise. And Harry, don't let anyone tell you you're too young for this. Your father was fighting a war at your age. Potters rise to what's needed. Harry nodded. He turned to leave, but paused. Griphook. The books. The weapons. I want access to all of it. Can we arrange transport to somewhere secure? The black property, Grimmauld Place, once cleared of its current occupants, would serve. Or we can establish a secured residence within the alley itself. There are several properties that are currently unoccupied. Both. Set it up. And the portraits, can they be moved? With care. Move them to wherever I end up living. I've got about 15 years of family history to catch up on. Charles beamed. Several of the other portraits started talking at once, clearly delighted at the prospect of an audience after decades in a dark vault. Harry left them to it and followed Griphook back to the cart. The ride back up was faster, or maybe it just felt faster because Harry's mind was racing. He was thinking about logistics. About the Order members who'd have to leave Grimmauld Place tonight, scrambling for a new headquarters. About Dumbledore's face when he realized what had happened. About how quickly news would spread, and what the Daily Prophet would do with it, and whether Voldemort would see opportunity in the chaos. Good. Let him. Harry was done being reactive. The cart lurched to a stop and Griphook led him back through the tunnels to a side door that opened directly onto Diagon Alley. Harry stepped out into late afternoon sunlight and stood there for a moment, just looking. The alley was busy. Witches and wizards moved between shops, carrying bags, arguing over prices, dragging children away from the window of quality Quidditch supplies. A street vendor was selling roasted chestnuts from a cart enchanted to keep them perpetually warm. Two old wizards sat outside Florian Fortescue's empty shop. Harry felt a pang at that, remembering the friendly ice cream man who disappeared over the summer, playing chess with pieces that moved on their own and occasionally argued with the players. This was his. All of it. The cobblestones beneath his feet, the buildings stretching up on either side, the ancient archway at the far end. 400 years of Potter ownership, ticking along quietly in the background while the world forgot. He didn't feel powerful. He felt responsible. There was a difference, and it mattered. The ward team will begin at the Leaky Cauldron entrance and work inward, Griphook said, appearing at his elbow. Both entry points will be sealed to the listed individuals within 3 hours. The interior wards, keyed exclusion from all buildings on the property, will take slightly longer. By sunset, the alley will be fully locked down to your specifications. Good. What about Grimmauld Place? A separate team. Midnight deadline, as you specified. We will deliver formal eviction notices by owl within the hour. Harry nodded. He could feel people starting to notice him, a girl about his age with her mother, pointing and whispering. A shopkeeper in the doorway of Slug and Jigger's apothecary doing a double-take. One more thing, Harry said. I want the lease records for every shop in the alley. Current tenants, payment history, terms. I want to know who's struggling and who's not. I want to know who's been paying into a protection racket, and don't tell me there isn't one, because Mundungus Fletcher used to brag about it, and I want to know who's been threatened by Death Eaters. Can you have that ready by tomorrow? Griphook looked at him with something very close to respect. By tonight, if you wish. Tonight, then. The whispers were spreading. Harry could see it moving through the alley like a wave, people nudging each other, heads turning, the particular electric buzz that followed him wherever he went in the wizarding world. The boy who lived, standing in the middle of Diagon Alley without a handler or a minder or an order escort. That alone was newsworthy. What came next would be explosive. He walked. Not toward any shop in particular, just walked, letting himself be seen. Past Ollivander's, where the old wand-maker peered at him through the dusty window with those unsettling silver eyes. Past the magical menagerie, where something with too many legs threw itself against the glass as he passed. Past Gringotts, gleaming white at the far end of the alley, and back again. He was halfway back up the alley when he felt it. A shiver in the air. A vibration in the cobblestones beneath his feet. And then a sound, not audible, exactly, but felt. A deep, resonant thrum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the stones and the buildings and the ancient magic that had seeped into this place over centuries of use. The wards were going up. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. It was like standing inside a bell as it was being struck, the magic radiating outward from the leaky cauldron entrance, sweeping through the alley in a wave. Shoppers stopped and looked around, confused. A few of the older witches and wizards, the ones with enough magical sensitivity to feel what was happening, went pale. The ward reached the far end of the alley and settled into place with a sound like a lock clicking shut. The air shimmered for just a moment, a faint golden ripple across the sky above the alley, and then it was done. Diagon Alley was his. A crack of apparition snapped the quiet. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Harry turned to see 5 people materializing at the leaky cauldron end of the alley. They must have just barely made it through the entrance before the ward solidified. Tonks, her hair a furious red. Kingsley Shacklebolt, tall and imposing in his aura robes. Hestia Jones. Daedalus Diggle. And leading them all, moving with a speed that belied his age, his silver beard streaming behind him, his blue eyes blazing, Albus Dumbledore. They'd felt the wards. Of course they had. Dumbledore especially, the man's magical sensitivity was legendary. He'd probably known the instant the Goblin Ward team started working. Harry stood his ground in the middle of the alley and watched them come. Dumbledore reached him first. The old wizard's expression was a masterwork of controlled emotion, concern on the surface, with something harder underneath. Not anger. Alarm. "Harry," he said. "My boy, what have you? I'm not your boy." The words landed like a slap. Tonks flinched. Kingsley's hand drifted toward his wand. Harry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've been to Gringotts, Professor. I've had my inheritance audit. I've read my parents' will, the one you sealed. I've seen my family vault, the one you kept me from. I've reviewed your withdrawals from my trust fund. And I've learned that I own the ground you're standing on." Dumbledore's face didn't change. But something behind his eyes shifted, a recalculation. Harry had seen that look in chess players who just realized their queen was in danger. "Harry, I can explain, I'm sure you can. You're very good at explaining. You explained why I had to go back to the Dursleys every summer. You explained why I couldn't know about the prophecy. You explained why Sirius had to stay locked up in that house until he was so desperate to get out that he," Harry stopped. Breathed. The grief surged and he shoved it back down, not because he was hiding from it but because he had work to do. "You can explain all you want. But you'll be doing it from outside my property." Dumbledore's gaze swept the alley, taking in the Goblin Ward team, visible now, at both ends of the street, putting the finishing touches on their work. His expression tightened. "You've had Gringotts ward the alley against us. Against the Order of the Phoenix. Every member. You step outside the boundary and you won't be able to come back in. Harry, this is reckless. The Order uses Diagon Alley for supply runs, for communication, for for operating out of my godfather's house without my permission. For spending my parents' money without my knowledge. For keeping me ignorant and manageable while you made decisions about my life that my parents explicitly told you not to make. Harry took a step closer. He was shorter than Dumbledore, everyone was shorter than Dumbledore, but the old man, for the first time in Harry's memory, took a step back. You sealed their will. You put me with the Dursleys when they said not to. Sirius should have had me. The Longbottoms should have had me. McGonagall should have had me. Does she know? Does she know she was named? Something flickered across Dumbledore's face. Guilt. Just a flash of it, quickly buried, but Harry saw it and knew the answer. She didn't know. You never told her. The blood wards at Privet Drive were the strongest protection available, my parents didn't care. They left instructions, and you threw them away because you thought you knew better. You always think you know better. The alley had gone silent around them. Shoppers were pressed against windows, watching. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways. Harry was aware of every eye on them and didn't care. Dumbledore drew himself up. The genial grandfather act was gone, what was underneath was the wizard who defeated Grindelwald, who'd faced down Voldemort, who held the wizarding world together through 2 wars by sheer force of will and political maneuvering. It was, Harry had to admit, an impressive sight. You are a child, Dumbledore said quietly. A grieving child making decisions that will have consequences you cannot foresee. I did what I did to protect you. Every choice I made was, for the greater good. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. Dumbledore's face went white. Actually, physically white, as if the blood had drained from it in a single heartbeat. Yeah, Harry said softly. I know about Grindelwald. I know what that phrase means to you. And I'm telling you, don't ever use it on me again. Don't ever justify what you did to my life with the same words he used to justify what he did to the world. Tonks looked like she wanted to say something. Kingsley put a hand on her arm and shook his head. Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, the blazing intensity was gone. What was left was old. Tired. And, if Harry was reading it right, afraid. What do you want, Harry? I want you to leave my property. I want you out of Grimmauld Place by midnight. The goblins will be delivering that notice separately, but consider this your heads up. I want you to stop spending my money, stop blocking my mail, stop voting my Wisengamot seats, and stop making decisions about my life. And the war. Voldemort is, still my problem. I know. The prophecy made sure of that. But I'll fight him my way, with my resources, on my terms. Not as your soldier. Not as your weapon. As myself. He meant it. Every word. He could feel the truth of it settling into his bones like the wards had settled into the stones of the alley. Dumbledore studied him for a long, long moment. Then, very slowly, he nodded. You have made your position clear. I will, respect it. For now. He turned to his order members. We're leaving. Albus, Kingsley said carefully, the wards, will allow us to exit. They are exclusion wards, not containment wards. Mr. Potter wishes us gone, not trapped. His gaze returned to Harry. I hope, in time, you will understand that everything I did, was for a child you never once asked for input from. I understand that perfectly. Dumbledore flinched. It was tiny, just a tightening around his eyes, a minute shift in his posture, but it was there. Then he turned and walked toward the leaky cauldron entrance, his order members falling in behind him. Tonks glanced back at Harry with an expression he couldn't read. Kingsley gave him a single, long look that might have been assessment, or might have been respect. Then they were gone, passing through the ward line with a faint shimmer of gold, and Harry knew, felt it in the magic thrumming through the stones, that they wouldn't be coming back. He stood alone in the middle of Diagon Alley. The sun was setting. The golden light caught the windows of the shops and turned them into mirrors, and for a moment, the entire street seemed to glow. People were staring at him. Of course they were. He'd just publicly confronted the most powerful wizard in Britain and sent him packing. The story would be everywhere by morning. The prophet, the quibbler, the wireless, by tomorrow, every witch and wizard in the country would know that Harry Potter owned Diagon Alley and had banned the Order of the Phoenix from it. Good. A door opened behind him. Footsteps on cobblestone. Then a voice, dry, precise, female. Well. That was the most entertaining thing I've seen in this alley since the Weasley twins' grand departure. Harry turned. A girl his age stood in the doorway of a shop he didn't recognize, Greengrass Enchantments, the sign read, in elegant silver lettering. She had dark hair, sharp features, and the kind of expression that suggested she was perpetually unimpressed by everything around her. She was wearing Hogwarts robes, Slytherin green. Daphne Greengrass, she said, because apparently she was the type of person who introduced herself without being asked. My family owns this shop. Well, we lease this shop. From you, apparently. She looked him up and down. You're shorter than I expected. Everyone says that. Yes, well. You project a certain stature in the prophet. All that destiny and drama. She leaned against the doorframe. My parents are going to want to talk to you. So is every other shopkeeper in this alley. You've just upended the entire commercial ecosystem of magical Britain, and it's not even dinner time. Is that a compliment or a criticism? An observation. I don't do compliments. They create an expectation of reciprocity that I find exhausting. She tilted her head. Do you have a plan? Beyond the dramatic confrontation and the goblin wards? I'm working on it. Brilliant. The most powerful teenager in Wizarding Britain is working on it. She pushed off the doorframe. Come inside. My mother makes very good tea, and you look like you haven't eaten in a week. We can discuss your complete lack of a plan over biscuits. Harry looked at her. She looked back, utterly unmoved. He almost said no. He almost said he had things to do, people to talk to, a war to prepare for. But his stomach chose that moment to remind him that he hadn't, in fact, eaten anything since yesterday, and the mention of biscuits triggered a physical reaction that was embarrassingly close to desperation. Fine, he said. But I have questions about the lease agreement. Of course you do. The rent is too high, by the way. My father's been saying so for years. Now that the landlord is a 16-year-old with a savior complex, perhaps we'll finally get somewhere. She disappeared inside. Harry followed, and as he crossed the threshold, he felt the ward magic pulse once, a warm, golden thrum that ran through the soles of his feet and up through his body. Welcome home, it seemed to say. Behind him, the sun finished setting over Diagon Alley, and the enchanted street lamps flickered to life one by one, casting pools of warm light along the cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, a goblin war horn sounded, the ward team, announcing their work complete. The sound echoed off the old stone buildings and faded into the evening air. Harry Potter's alley was locked up tight. Now the real work could begin. 5 hours later, Harry was sitting in a back room of Greengrass Enchantments with a cup of tea going cold in his hand and a stack of parchment that would have given Hermione an aneurysm. Astoria Greengrass, Daphne's mother, a tall woman with the same dark hair and the same unimpressed expression dialed down to something closer to polite wariness, had fed him shepherd's pie and 3 kinds of biscuit and then diplomatically retreated, leaving Harry alone with Daphne and the lease records Griphook had delivered by Goblin Courier 40 minutes ago. This is insane, Harry said, flipping through pages. Some of these leases haven't been updated since the 1800s. Ollivanders is paying 12 galleons a year. 12. His family has been there since 382 BC. Grandfathered in, literally. Daphne was sitting cross-legged on a chair across from him, shoes off, reading through a separate stack with the focused efficiency of someone who'd grown up surrounded by contracts. The more interesting number is what the newer shops are paying. Look at Madame Malkin's. Look at Twilfit and Tadding's. Look at the markup. Harry looked. His eyes widened. The newer the shop, the higher the rent. But it's not proportional to the space, it's proportional to the owner's blood status. There it is. Daphne set down her parchment. The Potter family account managers, goblins, all of them, appear to have been charging higher rents to Muggleborn-owned businesses. Not by policy, but by practice. It's been going on for at least a century. That stops now. Obviously. But you'll want to do it publicly. A formal announcement. Rent restructuring across the board, tied to square footage and location rather than who your grandparents were. It'll cost you some income in the short term, but the goodwill will be worth 10 times whatever you lose. Harry looked at her. You're good at this. I'm a greengrass. We've been navigating pureblood politics since before the statute of secrecy. My family is neutral in this war because we can't afford to be anything else. We're not wealthy enough to buy protection and not powerful enough to fight. But we understand how the game is played. She met his eyes. And right now, you're the most interesting piece on the board. I'm not a piece. No. You're a player. That's what makes this interesting. She picked up her tea. You're going to need allies. Not Order members, they're too entangled with Dumbledore. Not Ministry people, they're too entangled with whoever's paying them this week. You need the shopkeepers. The working people of the alley. The ones who've been ignored by both sides of this war. How do I get them? You've already started. The ward display, the confrontation with Dumbledore, half the alley saw it, and the other half will hear about it by breakfast. But grand gestures only carry you so far. What people want is practical. Lower rents. Better security. The feeling that someone actually gives a damn whether they get hexed on the way to work. She paused. There's been a protection racket running in the alley for years. Small time, Mundungus Fletcher and his lot, but it's gotten worse since the Death Eaters started making threats. People are scared. Griphook mentioned the same thing. I asked him for records. Good. Clean it up. Post goblin security if you have to. Give people a reason to feel safe, and they'll follow you anywhere. Harry sat back and rubbed his eyes. The adrenaline from the day was fading, and underneath it was exhaustion, bone deep, the kind that came from grief and revelation and the dizzying, terrifying weight of responsibility. You know, he said, this morning I was sitting in a bedroom staring at a wall. Now I own a street and I've started a political crisis. Welcome to being a lord. It's mostly paperwork and people being angry at you. You're very comforting. I'm not trying to be comforting. I'm trying to be useful. There's a difference. She set down her tea. One more thing. You should know, my family is neutral, but I'm not. Not anymore. You did something tonight that I've never seen anyone in our world do. You told Dumbledore no. Not secretly, not behind closed doors, not through political maneuvering. You did it in the open, to his face, in front of witnesses. That matters. Why? Because there are a lot of people in this world who've wanted to say no to Albus Dumbledore and never had the spine. You just showed them it was possible. Some of them will hate you for it. But more of them will be grateful. She stood. You should sleep. You look terrible. There's a flat above the shop, empty, since my father's been staying with my aunt. You can use it tonight. I should go to Grimmauld Place. Make sure the order is actually leaving. The goblins will handle it. That's what you're paying them for. Sleep, Potter. Tomorrow is going to be worse. She left the room with the particular brisk efficiency that Harry was beginning to recognize as her default setting. He sat alone with his cold tea and his parchment and the distant hum of ward magic vibrating through the floor. He thought about writing to Ron and Hermione. He should. They'd hear about this, probably already had, if the order had made it back to wherever they were going, and they deserved to hear his side. But when he picked up a quill, he couldn't find the words. Not yet. Not until he knew where he stood with them. Ron's parents were order. Hermione trusted Dumbledore implicitly. This was going to get complicated. He set the quill down and walked to the window. Diagon Alley lay below him, lit by street lamps and the soft glow of shop signs that never fully went dark. It was quiet now, the shops closed, the street empty except for a goblin patrol moving in silent formation near the leaky cauldron entrance. His alley. His people. His responsibility. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes, and for the first time since Sirius fell through the veil, the roaring, screaming grief in his chest settled into something quieter. Not gone. Not healed. But focused. Given direction. He'd lost Sirius because he'd been kept ignorant and powerless by people who claimed to love him. Never again. He fell asleep in the chair by the window, the ward magic humming him to sleep like a lullaby, and dreamed of a great black dog running free across an endless golden street. Chapter 2, The Alley responds. Harry woke to the sound of someone banging on the door downstairs and the smell of something burning. He was on his feet with his wand drawn before he was fully conscious, a reflex drilled into him by 5 years of things trying to kill him in his sleep. The flat above Greengrass enchantments was small, unfamiliar, and filled with grey morning light that told him it was barely past dawn. His neck ached from sleeping in the chair. His glasses were crooked on his face. The banging continued. 3 sharp raps, a pause, 3 more. Potter. Daphne's voice, muffled by the floor between them. Get down here. And if you set my father's curtains on fire, I swear on Merlin's. Harry looked at the window. The curtains were, in fact, smoldering slightly where his hand had been gripping them. Accidental magic. Hadn't done that in years. He slapped out the embers and headed downstairs. Daphne was standing in the shop's back room with a copy of the Daily Prophet in one hand and what appeared to be a howler, still sealed, vibrating ominously, in the other. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot and she was wearing a dressing gown over her clothes, which meant she'd been up for a while. Good morning, she said flatly. You're famous again. More famous. Differently famous. She tossed the Prophet at him. Harry caught it and looked at the front page. Boy who lived revealed as secret owner of Diagon Alley. Potter heir bans Dumbledore and Order of the Phoenix from Wizarding. Britain's most famous street goblin wards erected, Ministry, deeply concerned. The photograph beneath the headline showed Harry standing in the middle of the alley, facing Dumbledore. The magical image looped, Harry stepping forward, Dumbledore stepping back. Over and over. Whoever had taken the photo had captured the exact moment when the power dynamic shifted, and the Prophet had plastered it across 6 columns. Rita Skeeter? Harry asked. No byline. Staff report. Which means every reporter they have was working on it. Daphne pointed to the howler. That arrived 10 minutes ago. It's from Molly Weasley. I can tell by the shade of red. Harry looked at the howler. It was trembling with contained fury, the envelope actually hot to the touch. He thought about ignoring it. Then he thought about Molly Weasley, who had hugged him, fed him, treated him like a son, and the complicated knot of guilt and anger that came with knowing she was Order. She'd been in meetings about him. She'd known things she hadn't told him. But she'd also loved him, in her way. He picked up the howler and broke the seal. Harry James Potter. Molly Weasley's voice erupted from the envelope with the force of a small explosion. Daphne took a step back. What in the name of all that is magical do you think you are doing? Banning the Order from Diagon Alley? Evicting US from headquarters in the middle of the night? Albus Dumbledore has done nothing but protect you, and this is how you repay. Harry flicked his wand. The howler burst into flame and dissolved into ash. The silence that followed was thick. "She means well," he said quietly. "People who mean well are the most dangerous people in the world," Daphne said. "They never think they need to apologize." She picked up a second copy of the Prophet, she'd apparently bought several, and opened it to page 3. There's a ministry response. Fudge is monitoring the situation. The Wisendamat is debating whether goblin wards on privately owned property constitute a security concern. And Dumbledore gave a statement. Here, she read aloud, "I respect young Mr. Potter's grief and understand his desire for independence. I am confident that, in time, cooler heads will prevail." End quote. "Cooler heads will prevail," Harry repeated. Translation: He thinks you'll come crawling back when you realize how hard this is. He's wrong. I know. But he doesn't. That's your advantage, keep it. She folded the paper. There are people outside. Shopkeepers, mostly. Word spread fast. They want to talk to you. How many? All of them. Harry ran a hand through his hair, a pointless gesture, it was as untamable as ever, and straightened his glasses. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes. He looked like a teenager who'd slept in a chair, because that's what he was. "Give me 5 minutes. You get 3. There's a crowd forming and if you leave them too long they'll start making up their own version of events." Harry made it in 4. A quick wash in the flat's tiny bathroom, a cleaning charm on his robes that he was reasonably sure he'd done correctly, and he was walking out the front door of Greengrass Enchantments into the early morning light of Diagon Alley. The crowd was bigger than he'd expected. 50 people, maybe 60, gathered in a loose semicircle in front of the shop. He recognized some faces: Tom the barkeeper from the Leaky Cauldron, old and stooped and looking nervous. Madame Malkin, pin still stuck in the front of her robes, arms crossed. The owner of Flourish and Blots, whose name Harry had never learned, holding the Prophet like it was a dead fish. A dozen others he knew by sight but not by name, and another 30 he'd never seen before. They all went quiet when he stepped out. Harry looked at them. They looked back. The silence was expectant, charged, and he realized with a sinking feeling that they were waiting for a speech. He didn't have a speech. He'd barely had coffee. So he skipped the speech. "Morning," he said. "I imagine you've all seen the Prophet." Murmurs. Nods. A few crossed arms. "Right. So you know I own the alley." "I didn't know that myself until yesterday, so we're all catching up together. Here's what I can tell you, your leases are safe. Your shops are safe. I'm not raising rents, I'm actually going to be lowering them, once I've had a chance to review the agreements properly. Nothing changes about how you do business, except that there are goblin wards on the entry points now that exclude specific individuals." "Which individuals?" That was Madame Malkin, sharp and direct. "The Prophet says the Order of the Phoenix, but who specifically? I've got customers who might be members of the Order, and only confirmed members. If someone's a customer who happens to know someone in the Order, they're fine. The wards are keyed to specific magical signatures, not associations. If you can walk through the ward line, you're welcome here. And if we can't?" A voice from the back. Harry couldn't see who. "Then you're on a list for a reason. Come talk to me and we'll sort it out." "Why ban them at all?" Tom the barkeeper, wringing his hands. "The Order, they're supposed to be on our side, aren't they? Against you know who." Harry looked at Tom. At the fear in his face, not fear of Harry, but fear of the situation. Fear of being caught between powerful forces. It was the same fear Harry had seen in people his whole life, and he was tired of it. "The Order is Dumbledore's organization," Harry said. "He runs it, he makes the decisions, and for the last 15 years, some of those decisions were made with my money, on my property, about my life, without my knowledge or consent. That's done. This isn't about taking sides in the war, it's about taking control of what's mine. But if they can't come to the alley, where do they get supplies? Potions, ingredients, wand repairs, owl order forms, there are other places to buy potions ingredients. Hogsmeade. Nocturne Alley, if they're not too proud. Owl order. Harry shrugged. It's inconvenient. It's meant to be. When Dumbledore is ready to have an honest conversation about what he's done, we can talk about adjusting the wards. Until then, this is how it is. More murmuring. Harry could feel the crowd splitting, some nodding along, others uncomfortable. He caught Daphne's eye through the shop window. She gave him a tiny nod that said keep going. Look, Harry said, and his voice dropped. Not to a whisper, just to the register of someone being honest. I know this is strange. I know I'm 16. I know you're wondering why you should trust a teenager to manage the most important commercial street in Wizarding Britain. And honestly, I'm wondering the same thing. But here's what I can promise, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to make decisions behind your back. And I'm not going to let anyone, Dumbledore, the Ministry, or Voldemort, several people flinched at the name, use this alley as a chess piece in their wars. This is your home. Your livelihood. I intend to protect it. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, someone started clapping. Slow at first, then joined by others, not thunderous applause, not a standing ovation, but the steady, measured approval of people who'd heard something they wanted to believe and were deciding, cautiously, to trust it. It wasn't unanimous. Madame Malkin was still frowning. Tom was still wringing his hands. But it was enough. The crowd broke apart slowly, people drifting back toward their shops, talking to each other in low voices. Harry watched them go and felt the weight of what he'd done settle more firmly on his shoulders. Yesterday it had been an idea. Today it was real. Not bad, Daphne said, appearing at his elbow. You could use some polish, but not bad. I don't want polish. I want to be honest. Those aren't mutually exclusive, but we'll work on it. She steered him back inside. Tea. Breakfast. Then we need to talk about Grimmauld Place, because I got an owl from Griphook 20 minutes ago and it sounds like the eviction didn't go smoothly. Harry's stomach dropped. What happened? Nobody's dead or injured, so calm down. But apparently Alastor Moody attempted to dismantle the goblin wards with his own magic and had to be physically removed by 4 members of the Gringotts security force. Griphook used the word undignified. Coming from a goblin, I believe that translates to hilariously embarrassing for all humans involved. Despite everything, Harry snorted. They were halfway through breakfast, toast and eggs that Daphne had conjured with an ease that suggested she'd been cooking magically since childhood, when the fireplace flared green. Not the Fleur network. The fire turned emerald green, but nobody came through. Instead, a voice, Hermione's voice, tight and strained, called out from the flames. Harry. Harry, are you there? I know you're somewhere in the alley, the prophet said. Harry, please. He was at the fireplace in 3 strides, kneeling on the hearth. I'm here. The relief in Hermione's exhale was palpable even through the magical connection. Oh, thank God. Harry, what is going on? The order came back to the Burrow last night in a complete state. Mrs. Weasley was hysterical, Dumbledore looked like someone had died, Ron said. Where's Ron? A pause. He's here. He's. Harry, he's confused. We both are. The prophet is saying you own Diagon Alley and you've banned the order. Is that true? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Harry, we need to talk. Properly. Face to face. Can we come to you? You're not order members. The wards won't stop you. Come through the Fleur to Greengrass Enchantments, Daphne's shop. Daphne Greengrass? Hermione's voice sharpened with surprise. The Slytherin? Harry, what? Just come, Hermione. I'll explain everything. The fire died. Harry looked at Daphne, who was watching from the table with her tea raised halfway to her lips. Friends of yours, she said. Should I leave? No. I want you here. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. 5 minutes later, the fireplace erupted green again and Hermione stumbled out, brushing soot from her jumper. Ron was right behind her, taller than Harry remembered, red-faced, and wearing an expression that was trying to be angry but kept sliding into worried. Hermione threw her arms around Harry before he could speak. She held on for a long time, long enough that he felt some of the tension in his chest unwind. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. You look awful, she said. Thanks. I mean it. When did you last sleep properly? When did you last eat? Daphne's been feeding me. Hermione's gaze cut to Daphne, who gave a minimal wave from the table. The two girls assessed each other with the particular intensity that Harry had learned to recognize and stay out of. Greengrass, Hermione said carefully. Granger, Daphne replied with equal care. Tea. Please. Ron hadn't said anything. He was standing by the fireplace with his arms at his sides, looking at Harry with an expression that made Harry's chest ache. Not anger. Hurt. Ron, you banned my parents from Diagon Alley, mate. The words were quiet. Ron's voice was rough, like he'd been up all night. I banned the order, Harry said. Your parents are in the order. That's the same thing. It's not. It feels the same. Harry nodded. He crossed the room and stood in front of his best friend and didn't try to minimize it. I know. And I'm sorry it hurts them. But I need to tell you what I found out yesterday, and then you can decide if you think I'm wrong. He told them. Everything. The inheritance audit, the will, the sealed documents, the stolen money, the Diagon Alley deed. He laid it out methodically, the way he'd been turning it over in his mind all night, and he watched their faces as each piece landed. Hermione went pale at the sealed will. Her hand came up to cover her mouth when Harry recited the guardianship clause, under no circumstances shall Harry be placed with Petunia and Vernon Dursley. By the time he got to the financial withdrawals, she was pacing. That's, Harry, that's criminal. Misuse of guardianship authority, financial malfeasance, suppression of legal documents, the Wisengamot alone, I don't care about the Wisengamot. I care about the fact that Dumbledore decided, the night my parents died, that he knew better than they did about what should happen to me. And then he spent 15 years making sure no one could challenge that decision. Ron hadn't moved from his spot by the fireplace. His face had gone through a complicated journey during Harry's recitation, disbelief, then anger, then something that looked like nausea. The money, Ron said. Dumbledore was using your money to fund the order. 40,000 galleons a year. For 15 years. That's 600,000 galleons, Ron. Ron's family struggled to afford second-hand schoolbooks. The number hit him like a bludger. And my parents knew? Ron asked, very quietly. About the money? I don't know. I honestly don't know if they knew where the funding came from. That's part of what I need to find out. Ron stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he looked up. What do you need from me? Harry blinked. He'd been braced for argument, for Ron defending his parents, for the loyalty conflict that Daphne had predicted. Instead, Ron was looking at him with the same expression he'd worn in first year when he'd climbed onto a giant chessboard, scared, determined, ready. I'm your best mate, Ron said. That doesn't change because of this. My parents, they'll have to answer for what they knew. But you're my best mate, and someone nicked 600,000 galleons from you while you slept in a cupboard. That's not okay. So what do you need? Harry's throat tightened. I need people I trust. Here, in the alley. I'm building something and I can't do it alone. Then I'm here. Hermione, who had been watching the exchange with tears tracking silently down her cheeks, crossed the room and pulled them both into a fierce three-way hug that lasted until Daphne cleared her throat. Not to interrupt the bonding moment, she said, but there's a goblin at the door and he looks impatient. Which, for goblins, is really saying something. Griphook entered carrying a leather case so stuffed with documents that it was bulging at the seams. He set it on the table, looked at Hermione and Ron with the particular goblin expression that conveyed "I am tolerating your existence," and turned to Harry. 3 developments. First, the eviction of Grimmauld Place is complete. All Order members have been removed. The house is being warded as we speak. You may take possession at your convenience. Good. Second, the Ministry has filed a formal inquiry into the Diagon Alley wards. It is legally toothless, the Treaty of 1407 is clear, but it will generate press coverage and political pressure. Director Ragnarok suggests you prepare a public response. I'll handle it. Third. Griphook paused. His expression shifted into something that, on a human face, might have been anticipation. Neville Longbottom is outside. He arrived 10 minutes ago, walked through the wards without difficulty, and has been waiting patiently. He says he has information you need to hear. He also says, and I'm quoting, "Tell Harry that my grandmother just had a very loud conversation with Dumbledore and she is," and I quote, "furious enough to spit nails." Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Ron looked at Daphne. Daphne drained her tea and stood up. "I'll get more cups," she said. Neville Longbottom walked into Greengrass Enchantments looking like a man who'd been through a hurricane and come out the other side with a clarity of purpose that transformed his entire bearing. He was taller than Harry remembered, they hadn't seen each other since the Department of Mysteries, and there was a set to his jaw that hadn't been there before. A bruise on his cheek was fading from purple to yellow. Battle scar, probably from the Ministry fight. He hadn't bothered to heal it. "Harry," he said, and his voice was steady in a way it never used to be. "We need to talk about my parents." Harry gestured to a chair. Neville sat, accepted the tea Daphne handed him with a nod of thanks, and got straight to the point. "My grandmother got a copy of the Prophet this morning. She read the bit about your parents while being sealed and she went very quiet. Then she walked to the fireplace, called Dumbledore, and screamed at him for 45 minutes straight." "Why?" Ron asked. "Because my parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were named as Harry's secondary guardians. And my grandmother never knew." Neville's jaw tightened. She didn't know they'd been named. She didn't know the will existed. She didn't know that Dumbledore had sealed it. All she knew was the official story, that Harry had been placed with his Muggle relatives for protection, and that was that. The room was very quiet. If she'd known, Neville continued, she would have challenged it. Even after my parents were, after what happened to them, she would have fought for custody. She told Dumbledore that this morning. She told him that if she'd known James and Lily wanted the Longbottoms to take Harry, she would have petitioned the Wisengamot, and she would have won, and Harry would have grown up in our house. Harry couldn't speak. For a moment, the image was so vivid it physically hurt, growing up in a wizarding household, with a grandmother figure who actually cared, with Neville as something like a brother. A childhood that should have been his, stolen by a sealed document and an old man's arrogance. "Neville," he managed. "I'm not done." Neville set down his tea. "My grandmother also asked Dumbledore a question. She asked him why, if my parents were important enough to be named guardians of the Potter heir, no one made any effort to find a cure for them. St. Mungo's classified them as permanent patients in 1982 and stopped trying. My grandmother has been funding private healers for 20 years, and every single one has told her the same thing, the damage is irreversible." He paused. Dumbledore's answer was that some sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. Ron actually stood up from his chair. "He said what?" Hermione whispered. Greater good. Neville's voice was flat as a blade. He said it to my grandmother's face. About her son. About my mother. He looked at Harry. So when I say I'm here because I want to help you, it's not just because you're my friend. It's because Dumbledore left my parents to rot in a hospital ward and sealed away a document that might have changed all our lives, and I want him to answer for it. Harry reached across the table and gripped Neville's forearm. Neville gripped back. You're in, Harry said. Whatever this becomes, you're in. Neville nodded once, sharp. Then he looked around the table, at Hermione, who was wiping her eyes, at Ron, who was red-faced with anger, at Daphne, who was watching the whole exchange with an expression of intense, calculating interest. Greengrass, Neville said. Didn't expect to see you here. Didn't expect to be here, Daphne replied. And yet. Life is full of surprises. Mostly unpleasant ones. She straightened in her chair. Now that we've assembled what appears to be a war council made up of 2 Gryffindors, a Gryffindor who should have been in Ravenclaw, a Gryffindor who owns a street, and 1 Slytherin providing adult supervision, can we discuss strategy? Adult supervision. Ron said. You're 16. And yet the most organized person in this room. Funny how that works. She pulled a fresh piece of parchment toward her. The way I see it, we have 3 immediate problems. The Ministry's legal challenge. The Order's response, because Dumbledore isn't going to accept this gracefully. And Voldemort. Nobody flinched at the name. It was, Harry noted, a new development for everyone except him. The Ministry challenge is the easiest, Daphne continued. The Treaty of 1407 gives Gringotts sovereignty over private property wards placed at the owner's request. The Ministry can complain, but they can't compel the goblins to take the wards down, and they can't override them with Ministry magic. Griphook, correct? Griphook, who had been standing by the door with the patience of a predator waiting by a water hole, inclined his head. Correct. The Ministry has tried to abrogate the treaty 17 times in 600 years. They have failed 17 times. The Order is more complicated, Daphne said. Dumbledore's public statement was conciliatory, cooler heads will prevail, which means he's planning something behind the scenes. He's not going to confront Harry directly again. He'll work through intermediaries. McGonagall, probably. Lupin, if he can find him. People Harry cares about. He already sent Molly Weasley, Harry said. Howler this morning. Ron winced. Yeah. That sounds like Mum. The key is to keep the public narrative on our side, Daphne said. Right now, the Prophet is treating this as a spectacle, boy who lived throws tantrum, essentially. We need to shift that. Harry, you need to give an interview. To the Prophet? I'd rather eat my own wand. Not the Prophet. The Quibbler. Hermione's eyebrows shot up. Luna's father's magazine. It has a surprisingly large readership since your interview last year, Harry. And Lovegood, whatever else he is honest. He prints what you say. No spin, no editing, no Rita Skeeter. Daphne tapped her quill on the table. You give the Quibbler an exclusive. The full story, the sealed will, the stolen money, the guardianship violation. You let the public see the documents. Gringotts can authenticate them. That'll destroy Dumbledore's reputation, Hermione said slowly. It should, Neville said. The table went quiet again. The weight of what Neville had said, and what it meant, settled over them like a physical thing. Hermione spoke first. Dumbledore has done terrible things. To Harry, to Neville's family, to others we probably don't even know about yet. But he's also the only wizard Voldemort fears. If we destroy his credibility, we weaken the war effort. The war effort he funded with my money, Harry said. I know. I'm not defending him. I'm saying we need to be strategic about how we do this. Dumbledore brought down isn't just satisfying, it's dangerous. The power vacuum gets filled by Harry, Daphne said simply. That's the whole point. Harry doesn't need Dumbledore to fight Voldemort. He needs resources, allies, and information. He now has the first two. The third is what we need to work on. Harry let them talk. He was listening, but part of his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the vault, about the shelves of books his grandfather had mentioned. Potter family grimoires. Battle magic, ward crafting, blood protections. His family hadn't become powerful by accident, and he'd been fighting Voldemort for 5 years with a Hogwarts education that, he was beginning to suspect, had been deliberately kept limited. The Quibbler interview, he said, cutting across the debate. Yes. Set it up. Daphne, can you draft talking points? Hermione, I want you to review the legal documents, the will, the guardianship records, the financial statements. Find every violation, every law Dumbledore broke. We're going to need that for the Wizengamot eventually. Hermione's eyes lit up. Give that girl a research project with moral stakes and she was unstoppable. Neville, I need you to talk to your grandmother. If she's willing, I want her to go public with her side of the story. She's Augusta Longbottom, she's respected, she's a Wizengamot member, and she's angry. That's a combination we can use. She'll do it, Neville said. She's been waiting 30 years for someone to be angry alongside. Ron. Harry looked at his best friend. This is going to be hard for you. I need you to talk to your family. Not to convince them, just to find out where they stand. Fred and George, especially. And Ginny. Ron nodded slowly. Fred and George are going to side with you. They already think Dumbledore's a nutter. Ginny. He thought about it. Ginny's going to want to hear it from you directly. Then bring her here. And my parents? Harry held Ron's gaze. I don't know yet. I hope they didn't know about the money. I really do. But I need to find out. Ron swallowed hard. Yeah. Okay. He straightened up. What about the third problem? You know who? Voldemort, Harry corrected gently, is going to see this chaos and think it's an opportunity. He'll expect me to be distracted, isolated, fighting on too many fronts. He'll probe. Test the wards, maybe send Death Eaters to see how the new defenses hold. So we need to be ready, Neville said. We need to be more than ready. We need to be so well defended that when he does come, he bleeds for it. Harry pushed back from the table. Griphook, the Goblin Security Force. How large can it be? For sufficient payment? As large as you require. Gringotts maintains a standing force of 300. A quarter of those could be assigned to alley security without compromising the bank's own defenses. Do it. I also want to talk to Ragnarok about the possibility of hiring Goblin Wardmasters on a permanent basis. Not just exclusion wards, I want combat wards. Anti-apparition. Anti-portkey inside the alley except for authorized users. Detection wards for dark marks. Griphook's eyes glittered. Detection wards for dark marks would be controversial. It would mean any Death Eater who walks into the alley gets flagged the second they cross the threshold. It would also mean any shopkeeper who took the mark under duress, and there are several, would be exposed. Harry paused. He hadn't considered that. Daphne caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Table that one, he said. For now. But I want the combat wards and the anti-apparition up by end of day. This alley is going to be the safest place in Wizarding Britain. Griphook gathered his case and departed with the particular purposeful speed of a goblin who'd just been given an exciting amount of work. The door had barely closed when Daphne turned to Harry with an expression he was beginning to recognize, her "I need to tell you something you don't want to hear" face. You need to visit the vault again, she said. I know. The grimoires, not just the grimoires. The portraits. Your grandfather mentioned battle magic. You need to learn it, and you need to learn it fast. Hogwarts defense training isn't going to cut it against what's coming. I taught the DA, you taught 5th years to cast patron uses and stunning spells. That's admirable. It's also like teaching someone to throw punches and then sending them into a sword fight. She leaned forward. Harry, Voldemort has 50 years of dark magic knowledge. Dumbledore won't help you anymore, and frankly, I'm not sure he ever really did. He trained you just enough to survive, never enough to win. You need to train yourself. The Potter Vault has centuries of family magic. Use it. She was right. He knew she was right. The frustration of it burned, all those years at Hogwarts, and no one had ever mentioned that his family had their own magical tradition. No one had suggested he might benefit from accessing it. Because Dumbledore hadn't wanted him to. The realization was cold and certain. Keep the weapon ignorant. Keep the weapon dependent. That way, when the time came, the weapon would do as it was told. This afternoon, Harry said. After the Quibbler interview. I'll go to the vault. The interview happened at noon, in the back room of Greengrass Enchantments, with Xenophilius Lovegood sitting across from Harry in robes that appeared to be made of stitched-together Quibbler pages. Luna had come with her father. She drifted into the shop, gazed around with her usual serene expression, and said, "The Raxperts are very thin here. You must be thinking clearly, Harry." Then she sat in a corner and started drawing something in a notebook. Zeno Lovegood was a better journalist than most people gave him credit for. He asked direct questions, listened to the answers without interrupting, and didn't try to steer the narrative. Harry laid out the facts, the sealed will, the guardianship violations, the financial mismanagement, the Diagon Alley deed. He showed the documents. Griphook authenticated them with a Gringotts seal that glowed when pressed against genuine bank records. Zeno's eyes got wider with each revelation. "Mr. Potter," he said, quill scratching furiously, "are you accusing Albus Dumbledore of criminal misconduct?" "I'm stating facts and letting people draw their own conclusions." The will was sealed. The money was taken. I was placed with guardians my parents explicitly excluded. Those aren't accusations, they're records. And the ban on the Order of the Phoenix? The Order operated out of my property, funded by my money, making decisions about my life, without my knowledge or consent. I've reclaimed my property and my autonomy. The ban stands until I have reason to lift it. What would constitute such a reason? Harry thought about it. Accountability. I'm not asking for an apology, I'm asking for acknowledgement. Dumbledore made choices that hurt people. Me. The Longbottom family. Others I probably don't know about yet. Until he acknowledges that, I have no reason to trust him or his organization in my home. Zeno nodded, scribbling. Luna looked up from her drawing and said, without preamble, "The Nargles say you're going to change everything. What do the Nargles say about whether it'll work?" "They say you should eat more vegetables." Zeno looked at his daughter with fond bewilderment, then back at Harry. "One more question. The war against He Who Must, against Voldemort." He stumbled over the name but got it out. "Are you still committed to fighting?" "More than ever. But on my terms. Not as anyone's weapon." The interview was done in an hour. Zeno promised the issue would be on the streets by morning. The Quibbler had a surprisingly efficient printing operation, fueled mostly by Zeno's manic energy and Luna's inexplicable ability to operate complex machinery while appearing to think about something else entirely. Harry barely had time to eat a sandwich. Ron had gone to find food and return with enough to feed an army, a habit born of Weasley family meals, before Griphook arrived for the vault visit. The ride down was the same as before, wild, dark, exhilarating, but this time Harry was focused. When the obsidian door opened and the cathedral vault spread before him, he went straight for the bookshelves. The Potter grimoires were bound in leather of various ages, from near new to so ancient the covers were barely holding together. Harry pulled one at random, on the application of blood-bound wards, by Iolanthe Potter, 1392, and opened it. Magic leapt off the page. Not metaphorically. The text glowed, and understanding flooded into him with a physical sensation, like warm water pouring into his skull. He gasped and nearly dropped the book. Family grimoires, Charles's portrait said from across the vault, sounding amused. They're designed to impart knowledge to Potter blood. Won't work for anyone else, they'd just see blank pages. For you, they teach. Quickly. Harry opened the book again. The knowledge was there, ward theory, blood anchoring, the mathematical foundations of protective magic. Not just words on a page but a deep, intuitive understanding, as if he'd studied it for months in the space of seconds. How much can I learn this way? As much as you can absorb. There are limits, your mind needs time to integrate it, especially the practical applications. But the theory? Take what you need. Harry started pulling books. Potter Family Battle Magic, a compendium. Blood and Bone, Advanced Protective Enchantments. The Art of Magical Combat, as practiced by the most ancient house of Potter. A slim volume with no title that turned out to be a treatise on occlumency written by a Potter ancestor who described Snape's teaching method as, Harry checked the date, 1743, well, the author couldn't have known Snape, but the described, brute force legilimency as instruction, technique was condemned in terms that made Harry laugh for the first time in days. He sat on the floor of the vault, surrounded by books, and read. The magic poured in, battle techniques, shield variations, offensive spells he'd never heard of, ward configurations that made Hogwarts protections look like a garden fence. His family had been warriors. Not the flashy, headline-grabbing kind, the quiet, methodical kind who studied magic like a science and applied it like an art. One book in particular caught his attention. The Griffin's Gambit, a Potter's Guide to Magical Warfare. It was written in the hand of Fleamont Potter, his great-grandfather, the one who'd invented Sleekeasy's hair potion and used the profits to triple the family fortune. But before he'd been a potioneer, Fleamont had been a duelist. A champion-level duelist, apparently, who'd won 12 consecutive tournaments before retiring to pursue more profitable endeavors. The book was a masterwork of combat theory. Not just spells, strategy. How to read an opponent's stance. How to control the terrain of a duel. How to layer shields so that each one fed energy into the next, creating a defensive cascade that could absorb punishment almost indefinitely. How to cast silently, wandlessly, with gesture alone. The key to magical combat, Fleamont had written, is not power. Any fool with a wand can generate power. The key is efficiency. A precisely targeted reducto will defeat a wildly cast killing curse every time, because the reducto hits the ground beneath the caster's feet 1/10 of a second before the killing curse reaches its target. The caster falls. The curse goes wide. Efficiency. Precision. Timing. Harry absorbed it all. He sat in that vault for 4 hours, and when he finally stood, legs cramping, eyes dry, head buzzing with knowledge, he felt different. Not just informed. Armed. He tested it. Standing in the open space of the vault, he raised his wand and cast a shield, not the standard protego he'd been taught, but the layered cascade from Fleamont's book. The magic responded eagerly, as if it had been waiting for him to ask. The shield materialized as a shimmering, multifaceted barrier that hummed with contained energy. Charles watched from his portrait, grinning. Try the offensive sequence, his grandfather suggested. Page 212. Harry flipped to the page, absorbed the knowledge, and turned toward a target dummy that stood against the far wall. He hadn't noticed it before, but of course a family of duelists would keep a practice dummy in their vault. The spell sequence was 3 moves, a feint left, a ground-targeted reducto to destabilize, and a spiraling curse that used the dust and debris from the reducto as a secondary weapon, shrapnel driven by magical force. Harry executed it in a fluid motion that felt right in a way that Hogwarts magic never had. The target dummy exploded. Not broke. Not cracked. Exploded, in a shower of splinters and magical sparks that peppered the far wall. Ha! Charles crowed. That's Potter magic, boy. That's in your blood. Harry lowered his wand. His hand wasn't shaking. His magic felt warm, eager, like a muscle that had been cramped for years and was finally being allowed to stretch. Grip hook, he said. I want these books moved to Grimmauld Place tonight. All of them. Set up a study and a practice room. I've got a lot of training to do. He rode the cart back up in silence, his mind churning with everything he'd absorbed. When he stepped back into the alley, the sun was low and the shadows were long, and the street was busier than it had been that morning. Word had spread. People were coming to Diagon Alley not to shop but to see, to walk the wards, to feel the new magic in the stones, to be part of whatever was happening. He found the others in Greengrass Enchantments, exactly where he'd left them, except that the group had grown. Fred and George Weasley were sitting on the shop counter, legs swinging, identical grins plastered across their freckled faces. Ginny Weasley was in the corner, arms crossed, watching Harry with an expression that was equal parts impressed and frustrated. And at the table, nursing a fire whiskey that Daphne appeared to have produced from somewhere, was Remus Lupin. Harry stopped in the doorway. Remus looked terrible. Worse than usual, and Remus always looked somewhat worn. His robes were threadbare, his face gaunt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. But his gaze, when it met Harry's, was steady. I'm not here as order, Remus said immediately. I walked through the wards. They let me in. You're not on the list. I'm not an active member. I haven't been to a meeting since. He trailed off. Since Sirius. Dumbledore asked me to come. To talk sense into you. I told him I wanted to hear your side first. He took a breath. I've heard it. Daphne and Hermione have been very thorough. And Sirius would have loved this. Every second of it. He would have been standing on a table in the leaky cauldron singing songs about Dumbledore's comeuppance. Remus's voice cracked, just barely, and he took a sip of fire whiskey to cover it. He would also have told you to be careful. Which I'm telling you now. But he would have been so proud, Harry. Harry crossed the room and hugged Remus Lupin. The werewolf stiffened, physical affection wasn't natural for him, then hugged back, hard, and for a moment they were just two people who'd loved Sirius Black and lost him. I should have been there for you, Remus said quietly. After he fell. I should have come to Privet Drive. Dumbledore said to give you space, and I listened, and I shouldn't have. You're here now. I am. He pulled back. What do you need? The same thing I need from everyone. Help. Honesty. And someone to tell me when I'm being an idiot. Fred leaned over from the counter. We can definitely handle that last one. Extensive experience, George confirmed. Ginny uncrossed her arms and walked over to Harry. She looked up at him, she was shorter than he remembered, or maybe he'd grown, and studied his face for a long moment. You're really doing this, she said. Not just the property stuff. You're really breaking away from Dumbledore. From the Order. From all of it. Yes. Good. She punched him in the arm, hard enough to sting. I'm in. And if you ever get eviction level angry at my mum and dad, give me a heads up first so I can warn them. They're stubborn, not evil. I know. The group settled around the table, too many people for the small back room, but nobody seemed to mind. Fred and George were already sketching security ideas on a napkin, portable swamp, but weaponized, imagine it filling a corridor if Death Eaters breached the wards. Hermione and Daphne had their heads together over the legal documents, and from the fragments Harry caught, they'd moved past their initial wariness and into the kind of intense intellectual partnership that happened when two very smart people realized the other one could keep up. Neville was talking to Remus about the Longbottom family's war record. Ron was eating. Harry stood back and watched them. His people. Chosen, not assigned. Trusted, not managed. It wasn't the Order of the Phoenix, it was something new, something that didn't have a name yet, built on honesty instead of secrets and respect instead of hierarchy. The ward magic hummed through the floor, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the lights of Diagon Alley burned in the darkness, and for the first time in a very long time, Harry Potter felt something that wasn't grief or anger or desperation. He felt ready. A crack split the air outside. Then another. Then a dozen more in rapid succession, and the ward alarms went off, a deep, resonant toll that vibrated through every building in the alley. Griphook materialized in the doorway, armor gleaming, short sword drawn. "Death Eaters," he said. 20 at least. "They're testing the Leaky Cauldron entrance." Everyone was on their feet instantly, wands drawn. Harry looked at his friends, at the determination on their faces, at the readiness in their stances. Then he looked out the window, where the golden shimmer of the wards was visible against the darkening sky, pulsing like a shield absorbing blow after blow. "They want to test the wards," Harry said, and smiled. "Let's go give them something to test." He walked out into his alley with his people at his back, and the cobblestones sang under his feet. Chapter 3, the counter-move. The ward line at the Leaky Cauldron entrance was a wall of gold light, and it was holding. Harry could see them through it, dark robes, white masks, the theatrical menace that Death Eaters wore like a uniform. 20 of them, maybe more, spread across the narrow passage between the Leaky Cauldron's back courtyard and the archway into Diagon Alley. They were throwing curses at the ward in alternating volleys, organized and disciplined, and each impact sent ripples of light cascading across the barrier's surface. The shoppers who'd still been in the alley were scrambling, mothers pulling children into shops, old wizards hobbling for cover, the street emptying with the panicked efficiency of people who'd lived through one war and recognized the opening moves of another. Harry registered all of this in the 2 seconds it took him to cross the street from Greengrass Enchantments to the ward line, and then he stopped thinking about the bystanders because Griphook was at his side and talking fast. 23 by our count. No confirmed identities yet, the masks prevent the detection wards from reading faces. They operate into the Leaky Cauldron's courtyard in 3 groups. Tom sealed the pub entrance when they came through. Smart man. Is the ward going to hold? Griphook gave him a look that, on a goblin, conveyed deep personal offense. That ward was built by 20 goblin ward masters using techniques refined over 6 centuries. It will hold against 23 wizards throwing schoolyard hexes until the sun burns out. A killing curse, green, screaming, unmistakable, hit the ward dead center. The golden light absorbed it without a flicker. Point taken, Harry said. The others had spread out behind him. Ron and Neville flanked him left and right, wands up and steady. Hermione was 10 paces back, already casting detection charms, her wand tracing complex patterns in the air. Fred and George had vanished, Harry didn't know where, which probably meant they were doing something creative and dangerous. Ginny was covering the far end of the alley in case this was a feint and a second group hit from the other entrance. Daphne had stayed inside the shop, which was the smart play. She wasn't a combat witch, and she knew it. Remus was moving along the shop fronts, herding the last stragglers indoors with the calm authority of a former professor. They can't get in, Ron said, watching the curses splash uselessly against the ward. So what's the point? They're just banging on the door. Probing, Harry said. Fleamont's book was alive in his mind. The first principle of siege warfare is reconnaissance. Never attack a fortification without first understanding its tolerances. They want to see how the wards respond to different types of magic. What absorbs, what deflects, what resonates. They're cataloging. So we should stop them from cataloging, Neville said. Harry looked at the ward line. Through it, he could see the Death Eaters repositioning, 3 of them stepping forward with wands raised in unison, preparing something coordinated. A combined assault, probably. More data for whoever was analyzing the ward structure. He could wait. Let the ward do its work, let the Death Eaters exhaust themselves against an immovable barrier, and clean up whatever was left. That was the safe play. The defensive play. Harry was done playing defense. Grip hook, he said. The ward is one-directional, right? Keeps people out but doesn't prevent outgoing magic. Grip hook's teeth showed. Correct. Harry raised his wand and stepped up to the ward line. The golden light was warm against his face, humming with power. Through it, the nearest Death Eater was perhaps 30 feet away, close enough to see the eyes behind the mask, wide and focused, not yet aware that the dynamic was about to change. He cast silently. Fleamont's technique, the spiraling reducto, targeted not at the Death Eater but at the cobblestones beneath his feet. The spell passed through the ward like it wasn't there and hit the ground with a crack that echoed off the buildings. The cobblestones erupted. The Death Eater went airborne, spinning, his wand flying from his hand. He hit the wall of the leaky cauldron with a sound like a sack of wet sand and slid to the ground, not moving. The volley of curses stopped. Every masked face turned toward Harry. He gave them a wave. Evening, he said. 2 seconds of absolute silence. Then the Death Eaters opened up, not the probing, coordinated volleys from before, but a furious, unstructured barrage. Killing curses, cruciatus, blasting hexes, everything they had. The ward absorbed it all, the golden light brightening with each impact until the entire entrance was blazing like a second sun. Harry cast again. And again. 3 spells in rapid sequence through the ward, a ground-targeted bombarda that cratered the courtyard and sent 2 more Death Eaters sprawling, a stunning spell that caught a third in the chest as he tried to dodge, and the feint and shrapnel combination from the vault training that turned a section of courtyard wall into a horizontal hailstorm of stone fragments. The screaming started. Not curses, actual screaming, pain and panic, as the Death Eaters realized they were standing in a kill zone. They could pour magic at the ward forever and it would do nothing. But Harry could hit them whenever he wanted, and they had no cover, no shield that could block spells they couldn't see coming through the glare of the golden barrier. Neville, Ron, pick your targets. Anything that comes through the ward is fair game. They didn't need to be told twice. Ron's stunning spells were powerful and accurate, the Keeper's Eye, Harry thought, always knowing where the target would be half a second before it got there. Neville was something else entirely. The boy who'd fumbled his way through 5 years of potions was gone. In his place was a young man who cast with controlled fury, each spell precise, each movement economical. He dropped 3 Death Eaters in 10 seconds. The courtyard beyond the ward was becoming a disaster zone. Stone debris, unconscious bodies, scorch marks. The remaining Death Eaters, maybe 15 still standing, were falling back, trying to find cover behind the rubble their own curses had created. One of them, taller than the rest, with a silver-chased mask that marked him as an inner circle member, raised his wand and shouted something Harry couldn't hear. They disapparated. All of them at once, the conscious ones grabbing the unconscious. The cracks of departure echoed through the courtyard like gunshots, and then it was silent. The whole thing had lasted less than 3 minutes. Harry lowered his wand. His heart was hammering, but his hand was steady. The magic in his blood was singing, not with bloodlust, not with the dark exhilaration he'd worried about, but with the simple, clean satisfaction of competence. He'd done what needed doing, and he'd done it well. Ron let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it since the first curse was thrown. Bloody hell, Harry. What was that? You were, those spells, since when can you, family grimoires? I'll explain later. That was Potter battle magic, Remus said quietly. He'd come up behind them during the fight, and his expression was complicated, pride and sorrow and something like recognition. James used to practice those sequences. He was never quite that smooth, though. He didn't have 4 centuries of instructional texts fed directly into his brain by enchanted books, Harry said. Hermione was at the ward line, running diagnostic spells. The ward is completely intact. It didn't even fluctuate. Whatever the goblins used, it's extraordinary. Griphook made a small, satisfied sound. Goblin craftsmanship does not fluctuate. From somewhere above and to the left, Fred Weasley's voice rang out. Oi! They left one behind. Harry looked up. Fred and George were on the roof of the building adjacent to the leaky cauldron. How they'd gotten there, he had no idea, and George was levitating an unconscious Death Eater who'd apparently been missed in the hasty retreat. The body drifted down and landed on the alley side of the ward with a thump. The mask had cracked. Beneath it was a face Harry didn't recognize, young, maybe early 20s, with a thin scar across his jaw. Nobody I know, Ron said. New recruit, Remus guessed. Voldemort's been pulling from the lower ranks. Desperate for numbers. Leave him for the goblins, Harry said. Griphook, can Gringotts hold a prisoner? We have facilities that would make Azkaban look like a country inn. We can hold him, question him, and extract information that would take the Ministry's Aurors weeks to get. Harry hesitated. Goblin interrogation methods were not known for their gentleness. But this was war, and the Death Eater on the ground had been throwing killing curses at a street full of civilians 5 minutes ago. Hold him. Question him. Nothing permanent, I want him alive and functional for trial. But I want to know who sent them, what they were looking for, and what Voldemort knows about the wards. Griphook signaled, and 2 armored goblins appeared from the shadows. Harry genuinely hadn't seen them until that moment, which was terrifying, and dragged the unconscious Death Eater toward the bank. That'll be in the Prophet by morning, Daphne said. She'd emerged from the shop and was surveying the damage to the courtyard beyond the ward with clinical interest. Death Eater attack on Diagon Alley repelled by Harry Potter and Goblin wards. No civilian casualties. Multiple enemy combatants down. It's perfect. People almost got hurt, Harry said. But they didn't. That's the story. That's what people will remember, that they were in Diagon Alley when the Death Eaters came, and Harry Potter's wards kept them safe. You can't buy that kind of loyalty. She was right. Already, doors were opening along the alley. Shopkeepers emerging, cautious at first, then with growing confidence as they saw the intact wards and the empty courtyard beyond. An old witch from the apothecary actually applauded. A wizard Harry didn't know reached out and shook his hand, pumping it up and down with a fervor that was almost painful. Thank you, the wizard said. Thank you, Lord Potter. My grandchildren were in the alley tonight. Lord Potter. It was the first time a stranger had called him that, and it landed differently than he'd expected. Not with the weight of formality, but with the weight of trust. Harry squeezed the man's hand. They're safe. Everyone's safe. That's not going to change. The crowd was growing, people coming out to look, to talk, to reassure each other. The energy in the alley had shifted. The fear that had permeated the street since Voldemort's return, the furtive glances, the hurried shopping trips, the empty tables at restaurants, was being replaced by something else. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Defiance. Community. The feeling of being protected by someone who actually showed up when it mattered. Harry let the moment breathe. Then he turned to his people. Meeting. Grimmauld Place. 1 hour. Grimmauld Place was different. Harry felt at the moment he crossed the threshold, the house had changed. The oppressive darkness that had saturated every room, every wall, every surface during the Order's occupation was lighter. Not gone, exactly, number 12 was too old and too steeped in black family magic to ever be cheerful, but the malevolent weight of it had lifted, as if the house itself had been holding its breath under Dumbledore's occupation and had finally exhaled. The troll-leg umbrella stand was still in the hallway. The portrait of Walburga Black was still on the wall, curtains drawn. But the elf heads were gone, Griphook's team had removed them, and the gas lamps burned steadily instead of guttering and hissing. As Harry walked past Walburga's portrait, the curtains twitched. He braced for screaming. Instead, a low voice said, "You are the new Lord Black." Harry stopped. He turned and, carefully, pulled the curtain aside. Walburga Black looked down at him from her frame. She was exactly as he remembered, gaunt, aristocratic, with the haughty bearing of a woman who'd spent her life looking down on everyone around her. But she wasn't screaming. Her dark eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that was unsettling but not hostile. "Sirius named me his heir," Harry said. "I know. I felt the magic change. The house has accepted you." Her lip curled. "A half-blood Potter. My son's final insult to the family name. Your son was the best man I ever knew." Something flickered in the portrait's painted eyes. Not warmth, not from Walburga Black, but a crack in the contempt. "A fissure. He was a fool," she said. "But he was my fool." The curtains snapped shut. Harry stared at the closed curtains for a moment, then shook his head and kept walking. The house had been thoroughly swept by the goblin team. The Order's belongings, maps, documents, communication mirrors, the long table where they'd held their meetings, were piled in the entrance hall in neat, labeled boxes. Harry had Griphook send them to the burrow. He wasn't petty enough to destroy them, and the information might still be useful to the war effort, even if the Order was going to have to wage it from somewhere else. He set up in the kitchen, the largest room, the one with the best light, and by the time the others arrived, he'd conjured enough chairs for everyone, a skill he'd absorbed from one of the grimoires and executed on the first try, which still felt slightly unreal, and had tea brewing on the ancient stove. They came in groups. Ron, Hermione, and Ginny through the flue. Neville and his grandmother Augusta, who swept into the kitchen with the bearing of a battleship and the expression of a woman who had been waiting decades for this particular war. Fred and George, who operated directly into the hallway and immediately started investigating the house's more interesting dark artifacts until Hermione chased them out of the drawing room. Remus, who came alone, looking more tired than ever but with a determination in his eyes that hadn't been there that morning. Daphne, who'd never been inside a Black family home and was examining the architecture with the analytical interest of someone cataloging assets. And Griphook, who arrived last, carrying a sheaf of parchments and accompanied by a goblin Harry hadn't met, a female, older, with intricate silver tattoos along her forearms and the bearing of someone who was very good at something dangerous. "This is Wardmaster Silvax," Griphook said. "She designed the alley wards. She has a report." "Let's hear it," Harry said. They settled around the kitchen table. Augusta Longbottom took the head without asking, and nobody challenged her on it because Augusta Longbottom was not a woman you challenged on seating arrangements. Or anything else. Silvax spoke in accented English, precise and clipped. The attack tonight was a probe. Standard tactical assessment, they were testing response times, ward resonance frequencies, and absorption thresholds. They learned very little, because your wards are goblin forged and operate on principles that wizard magic cannot easily analyze. However, she produced a diagram. They did learn one thing. They learned that the wards allow outgoing offensive magic. Harry nodded. "I used that. Cast through the ward at them." "Yes." Which was tactically effective in the moment but strategically problematic. If the enemy knows the ward is one-directional, they can plan for it. Shield formations before approaching. Anti-spell barriers. Or, more simply, they can attack from range, catapulted fiend fire, for instance, which does not require a caster to be within wand range. The room went quiet. Harry could feel the mood shifting from post-battle triumph to grim calculation. "What do you recommend?" he asked. "I recommend we upgrade. The current wards are defensive, they keep people out. What you need is an active defense system. Wards that respond to threats autonomously. Strike wards. Counter curse arrays. And," she paused, looking at Griphook, who nodded, "the gauntlet." "The gauntlet?" Silvax's silver tattoos seemed to glow. An ancient goblin fortification technique. Not used in centuries, because no goblin stronghold has needed it. The principle is simple: anyone who attempts to breach the primary ward triggers a cascading series of secondary wards, each one a different threat. Disorientation hexes. Gravity inversion. Targeted electrical discharge. The attacker must fight through 7 layers, each more dangerous than the last, while the primary ward regenerates behind them. No one has ever survived all 7 layers. Because no one's tried, or because they couldn't. Both. Harry looked around the table. Cost? Griphook consulted his ledger. Significant. The materials alone, goblin silver, runestone arrays, blood iron anchors, would run approximately 800,000 galleons. Hermione inhaled sharply. Ron's eyes went wide. Augusta Longbottom didn't blink. Do it, Harry said. Harry, Hermione started, that's a fortune. I have 74 million galleons and an alley full of people who need protecting. 800,000 is the cost of sleeping at night. Do it, Silvax. The wardmaster inclined her head. There was something in her expression, respect, perhaps, or satisfaction. Goblins appreciated decisiveness, and they appreciated clients who didn't haggle over the price of survival. Installation will take 3 days, Silvax said. The alley will need to remain open during construction. Closing it would cause economic damage and public panic. My team will work at night. Whatever you need. Griphook, coordinate. Griphook made a note. Silvax gathered her diagrams and left the kitchen with the brisk efficiency of someone who had a great deal of expensive work to do. Right, Harry said, turning to the rest of the table. Next problem. Hermione, the Ministry Challenge. Hermione had her notes spread out in front of her, a truly alarming amount of parchment covered in her tight, precise handwriting. The Ministry filed their formal inquiry this morning. It's toothless on its own, the Treaty of 1407 is clear, and I've found 17 precedents confirming that goblin-placed wards on private property are beyond Ministry jurisdiction. However, she held up a document. They're not relying on the inquiry alone. Fudge, or more likely whoever's advising Fudge, because the man can barely advise himself on what to have for breakfast, is pushing for an emergency session of the Wisengamot to invoke wartime powers. Wartime powers? Augusta Longbottom's voice was sharp as a blade. On what grounds? The Ministry hasn't officially declared war. Fudge spent all of last year denying Voldemort had returned. That's the problem. They can't invoke wartime powers without a formal declaration of war, and Fudge won't make one because it would be an admission that he was wrong. So they're trying to create a new legal category, emergency security provisions, that would give the Ministry authority to override private property protections in cases of imminent threat to public safety. And Dumbledore? Harry asked. Dumbledore is Chief Warlock. He controls the Wisengamot agenda. If he pushes for a vote on the emergency provisions, he can probably get one. Hermione's voice was careful, but Harry could hear the steel underneath. He won't frame it as being about you, of course. He'll frame it as being about security. About the danger of private citizens controlling critical infrastructure during wartime. It'll sound reasonable. It'll sound responsible. It'll sound like exactly the kind of thing Dumbledore is good at, Daphne said. Wrapping control in the language of concern. Augusta Longbottom placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. Then we beat him at his own game. I've been on the Wisengamot for 40 years. I know how votes work. Dumbledore has influence, but he doesn't have a majority, not on something like this. The old families won't support giving the Ministry more power over private property. It sets a precedent that threatens them directly. My grandmother is right, Neville said. The Wisengamot is split 3 ways, Dumbledore's faction, the Ministry loyalists, and the old families. The old families vote as a bloc on property rights. Always have. If we can get them on our side, they're already leaning our way, Augusta said. I had 4 flu calls this morning from family heads who are very nervous about the precedent. They don't care about Harry Potter's personal vendetta against Dumbledore, no offense, dear, none taken, Harry said. But they care deeply about the idea that the Ministry can override goblin wards on private land. If that passes, any of their estates could be next. She straightened in her chair. I'll handle the Wizengamot. Give me 3 days and I'll have enough votes to kill any emergency provision before it reaches the floor. And if Dumbledore goes around the Wizengamot? Ron asked. He's done it before. He practically ran the last war out of his office. He went around the Wizengamot because nobody pushed back, Augusta said. Because everyone was too scared or too awed or too comfortable to question the great Albus Dumbledore. Those days are over. She looked at Harry. Your Quibbler interview will help. When people see the documents, the sealed will, the financial records, Dumbledore's moral authority takes a hit. He can't play the wise elder statesman when the public knows he stole a child's inheritance. Harry was about to respond when the fireplace flared. Not green, orange. A priority flu signal, the kind that overrode security charms. Griphook stepped forward, hand on his sword, but the face that appeared in the flames was one Harry knew. Minerva McGonagall looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was down, Harry had never seen her hair down, and her eyes were red-rimmed behind her spectacles. She searched the room until she found Harry. Mr. Potter, she said, and her voice was the controlled, precise voice of a woman holding herself together by sheer force of will. I need to speak with you. Alone, if possible. But I'll take what I can get. Harry looked at his friends. Then back at McGonagall. She'd been named in his parents' will. 3rd choice for guardianship. She hadn't known. Come through, he said. She stepped out of the fireplace, dusted ash from her robes with an automatic gesture, and stood in the kitchen of number 12, Grimmauld Place, looking at Harry with an expression that broke his heart a little. Albus told me, she said. About the will. About my name in it. Her voice wavered and she locked it down. He told me this morning, after Augusta Longbottom's flu call. He said he'd intended to tell me when the time was right. As if there were a right time to tell a woman she'd been robbed of raising a child she stopped. Pressed her lips together. Started again. I went to Albus Dumbledore's office and I told him that in 50 years of knowing him, I had never been so ashamed to call him a colleague. And then I resigned from the Order of the Phoenix. The room was silent. I am not here as Dumbledore's envoy, McGonagall continued. I am here because James and Lily Potter trusted me with their son, and I failed that trust, not by choice, but by ignorance, and I am done being ignorant. She looked at Harry directly. What do you need from me? Harry's throat was tight. This was McGonagall, stern, fierce, unshakable McGonagall, who'd given him his first chance at Quidditch, who'd faced down Umbridge, who'd stood against Voldemort's forces without flinching. And she was standing in his kitchen, offering to fight for him. I need someone at Hogwarts, he said. Someone I trust, who can watch Dumbledore without being watched. Can you do that? I've been watching Albus Dumbledore for 50 years. The only difference now is that I'll be watching with my eyes open. She glanced around the kitchen, at the assembled faces, at the war council that was forming around her former student. Her expression softened, just slightly. You've gathered good people. I got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. Your mother had the same gift, drawing good people to her. McGonagall straightened her spine, and the steel was back. I should return to Hogwarts before I'm missed. Term starts in 6 weeks. I trust you plan to return. Harry hadn't actually thought about it. Hogwarts, which had been his home, his sanctuary, the first place he'd ever felt safe, now felt like part of Dumbledore's web. The old man was headmaster. He controlled the curriculum, the staff, the wards. Going back meant putting himself inside Dumbledore's sphere of influence. But it also meant being close to his friends. Being close to information. And demonstrating that he wasn't running from anything. "I'll be there," he said. McGonagall nodded. "Then I'll make sure you have what you need." Quietly. She stepped back toward the fireplace, then paused. "Mr. Potter, Harry. Your parents would be proud of you. I want you to know that." She vanished in a swirl of green flame before he could respond. The silence lasted about 3 seconds before Fred broke it. "Well, that was intense. Anyone else need a drink?" "I need a drink." "George, did we bring the left jacket pocket?" George said without looking up from the security sketches he was still working on. Fred produced a flask of something that smelled like it could strip paint and began pouring generous measures into teacups. Harry took one and didn't drink it, just held the warmth in his hands. "One more thing," he said, and the table quieted. Neville mentioned the Wizengamot. "I hold 2 seats, Potter and Black. I can't take them personally until I'm 17, but I can appoint proxies." He looked at Augusta. "Lady Longbottom, would you be willing to hold the Potter proxy?" Augusta's eyes widened, the first time he'd seen genuine surprise on her face. "You trust me with a Wizengamot vote? You've been fighting that body for 40 years. You know it better than anyone. And you've got a personal stake in making sure Dumbledore's power gets checked." "I do indeed." She inclined her head, a formal, old-world gesture of acceptance. "I would be honored." For the black seat, Remus. Remus, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, looked up sharply. "Harry, I can't. The Wizengamot has anti-werewolf provisions. They won't seat me. They won't seat you as a member. But there's no provision against a werewolf serving as proxy, I checked." He glanced at Hermione, who nodded confirmation. "It's a loophole. They'll hate it. Certain members will lose their minds over it. And that's exactly why I want you in that seat." A slow smile spread across Remus's face, the first real smile Harry had seen from him since Sirius's death. Sirius would have loved this. Sirius would have insisted on it. The meeting wound down. People broke into smaller groups, Augusta and Hermione huddled over Wizengamot procedural rules, Neville quizzing Griphook about goblin combat techniques, Fred and George exploring the house with the barely contained glee of professional troublemakers let loose in a dark magic toy box. Daphne caught Harry's arm as he was heading for the study. "We need to talk about Lucius Malfoy," she said. "What about him?" "He's going to come to you. Probably within the next 48 hours. She steered him into the hallway, out of earshot of the others. "Think about it from his perspective. He was exposed at the Department of Mysteries. He's facing charges. His standing with Voldemort is precarious at best, the prophecy was destroyed, the mission failed. He needs leverage, and you just became the most powerful independent player in Wizarding Britain. Malfoy tried to kill me. Multiple times. Malfoy tried to kill you when he had no better option. Lucius is not a true believer, he's an opportunist. He follows power. Right now, Voldemort's power is uncertain and yours is rising. He'll come with an offer. Information, probably. Names of Death Eaters. Ministry insiders. The kind of intelligence that wins wars. And in exchange, protection. For himself, for Narcissa, probably for Draco. He'll want immunity, or at least a guarantee that the winning side won't throw him in Azkaban when the dust settles. Harry leaned against the wall. The idea of dealing with Lucius Malfoy made his skin crawl. This was the man who'd slipped Tom Riddle's diary to Ginny Weasley. Who'd stood in graveyards with Voldemort. Who'd sneered at the Weasleys and called Hermione a mudblood by proxy through his son for years. But Daphne wasn't talking about forgiveness. She was talking about strategy. "If he comes," Harry said slowly, "what's the smart play? Listen. Don't commit. Get what you can and give nothing away. You hold all the cards, he knows it, you know it. The question is whether the information he offers is worth the cost of having Lucius Malfoy owe you a favor. She paused. In my experience, there's nothing more useful than a powerful person in your debt. Your experience. I'm a Slytherin, Potter. This is what we do. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time since they'd met. Dark hair, sharp jaw, gray eyes that missed nothing. She was 16, same as him, but she carried herself with the poise of someone who'd been navigating dangerous waters since childhood. Which, in Slytherin House, she probably had. Why are you helping me? He asked. And don't say the lease. You've been in this since yesterday morning and the lease isn't that important. Daphne was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, the practiced cool was gone, replaced by something more raw. Because my little sister is 12 years old and she's afraid to go to Hogsmeade because Death Eaters attacked it last spring. Because my father moved us into the flat above the shop because our house outside Edinburgh isn't safe anymore. Because both sides of this war have been perfectly happy to let neutral families twist in the wind as long as the great men get to play their great games. She met his eyes. You're the first person I've seen who actually cares about the people in the middle. The shopkeepers. The families. The ones who aren't chosen ones or Death Eaters or Order members. Just people. I care because I was one of them, Harry said. A nobody. A kid in a cupboard. Nobody asked me what I wanted either. I know. That's why I'm here. They stood in the hallway of the noble and most ancient House of Black, two 16-year-olds who should have been worrying about Quidditch and exams, and the moment stretched between them, not romantic, not yet, but the foundation of something that could become important. Mutual recognition. Mutual respect. Daphne broke it first, because she was constitutionally incapable of letting a moment linger when there was work to do. Go study your grimoires. I'll draft talking points for the ministry response. And Harry, yeah. When Malfoy comes, let me be in the room. I speak fluent Snake. Harry spent the next 2 days in a blur of activity that made his 5 years at Hogwarts look like a vacation. He trained. Every morning, for hours in the basement of Grimmauld Place, which he'd converted into a practice room with reinforced walls and goblin-forged target dummies that could simulate combat opponents. The Potter grimoires had given him the theory, now he was building the muscle memory. Shield cascades, offensive combinations, the spiraling reducto that was becoming his signature move. He practiced silent casting until it was as natural as breathing. He practiced wandless magic, limited, still, but growing, pushing the boundaries of what his body and his magic could do. Remus watched him train the first morning and went very quiet. You're faster than James was, he said afterward. And James was the fastest wizard I ever saw. I have better teachers. Harry nodded toward the stack of grimoires. For centuries of Potter duelists who wrote down everything they knew. It's more than that. The magic responds to you differently. It's eager. Remus chose his word carefully. As if it's been waiting. Neville trained with him. The Longbottom family didn't have grimoires. The attack on Frank and Alice had happened before they could pass down their family's magical traditions, but Neville was a natural combat wizard with a gift for herbological magic that Harry had never seen anyone else use. He could coax magical plants into weapons with a touch, devil's snare that moved on command, venomous tentacula that targeted specific individuals, even a strain of explosive seed pods that he'd cultivated himself and that detonated with enough force to breach a stone wall. Been working on those since 4th year, Neville said, tossing a pod in his hand with casual ease. Professor Sprout doesn't know about the explosive part. She thinks they're a decorative varietal. Neville. You've been growing bombs in the Hogwarts greenhouse. Only the small ones. The big ones need more sun than Scotland gets. Ron refused to be left behind. He didn't have family magic or specialized skills, but he had something that Harry valued more, an intuitive grasp of tactics that bordered on prescient. Their chess matches at Hogwarts hadn't been idle recreation. Ron thought in systems, in patterns, in contingencies. Harry put him in charge of defense planning for the alley, and within a day Ron had mapped every sight line, every choke point, every possible approach vector, and had designed a response protocol for 6 different attack scenarios. "This is just chess," Ron said, spreading his maps across the kitchen table. "The board is the alley, the pieces are people, and the objective is to keep the king safe. Which is you, by the way. So stop wandering around in the open like you're invincible." "I'm not invincible. Tell that to the Death Eaters you dropped through a solid ward line. You've got the whole alley thinking you're Merlin reborn. Don't ruin it by getting hexed buying a sandwich." Fred and George had turned number 93 Diagon Alley, their shop, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, into a combination joke shop and armory. Their products had always straddled the line between comedy and combat, now they were leaning hard into the combat side. Shield hats that could absorb a stunning spell. Decoy detonators upgraded with confusion charms. Peruvian instant darkness powder, bought in bulk and distributed to every shopkeeper in the alley. "Darkness is the great equalizer," Fred explained. "Death Eater can't curse what he can't see. And when you pair it with our new illumination goggles," George added, holding up a pair of brass-rimmed spectacles that looked absurd and probably were, "our side can see through the dark and theirs can't. Tactical advantage." "You two are terrifying," Hermione said, examining a detonator with grudging respect. "Thank you," they said in unison. Hermione had thrown herself into the legal battle with the ferocity she usually reserved for exam preparation, except this time the stakes were slightly higher than an outstanding in Transfiguration. She'd filed a formal complaint with the Wizengamot on Harry's behalf, documenting every violation of guardianship law, every unauthorized financial transaction, every suppressed document. The filing was 214 pages long. The clerk who received it reportedly needed a lie-down afterward. The Quibbler interview hit the streets on the second morning, and the effect was seismic. Harry was eating breakfast in the greengrass shop when Daphne slapped the issue down in front of him. The cover was, well, it was the Quibbler, so the cover featured an illustration of Harry standing on a pile of gold with the headline, "The Truth They Stole," alongside a smaller article about Crumplehorn Snorkax. But inside, the interview was presented clearly, seriously, and with full reproduction of the authenticated documents. "It's everywhere," Daphne said, sitting down with the controlled energy of someone trying not to vibrate. "My mother's been flooded with flu calls all morning. Every shop in the alley has customers asking about it. I've heard from 3 neutral families who want to meet with you." And, she paused, allowing herself a small, sharp smile. "The Prophet is running a response piece. They can't ignore it. They're framing it as unverified claims, but they're printing it, which means people are reading both versions and deciding for themselves." "And Dumbledore?" "No statement yet. Which tells me he's working on something. A man like Dumbledore doesn't go quiet unless he's planning." Dumbledore's countermove arrived on the 3rd morning in the form of a Wizengamot emergency session notice. Augusta Longbottom brought the news personally, stepping out of the fluid Grimmauld Place at 7 in the morning looking like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. "He's going to the full Wizengamot," she said. "Tomorrow. Emergency session. The stated agenda is, review of security provisions in designated commercial zones, which is bureaucratic code for, let's take Harry Potter's wards down." Harry set down his tea. "I thought you said you had the votes to block it." "I have the votes to block a straight property rights challenge. But Dumbledore isn't stupid, he's reframing the issue. He's not arguing that the Ministry has the right to override private property protections. He's arguing that Diagon Alley is critical infrastructure, like the Floo network or the Hogwarts Express, and therefore subject to emergency security oversight. Is there precedent for that? 1. The Floo Regulation Act of 1952, which established ministry oversight of the Floo network on the grounds that it was essential to public safety. If Dumbledore can convince the Wizengamot that Diagon Alley falls into the same category. She trailed off. Then the ministry gets oversight. Which means the ministry can order the wards removed. Or modified. Which amounts to the same thing. If they can modify the exclusion list, the whole point becomes moot. Harry stood and walked to the window. Grimmauld Place's kitchen looked out onto a tiny, overgrown garden that hadn't seen a gardener in decades. He stared at the dead roses without seeing them. Dumbledore was good. Harry had known that, had known it intellectually, but seeing it in action was different. The old man wasn't fighting him head-on. He was changing the battlefield. Shifting the terms of the debate so that even if Harry won the argument, he'd lose the war. "What time is the session?" Harry asked. 2 o'clock. "I'll be there." Augusta raised an eyebrow. "You can't speak. You're not 17. Your proxy, I'll be there," Harry repeated. "Not as a Wizengamot member. As a member of the public. The gallery is open, isn't it?" "It is, but, then I'll be in the gallery. And I'll bring every shopkeeper from Diagon Alley who wants to come." Augusta stared at him. Then she laughed, a sharp, surprised bark of laughter that seemed to startle even herself. "You're going to pack the gallery with your tenants." "I'm going to pack the gallery with citizens who have a vested interest in the outcome. Citizens who were in the alley when the Death Eaters attacked and who were protected by the wards Dumbledore wants removed. Citizens who can look every Wizengamot member in the eye and ask them, are you really going to tear down the only thing keeping us safe? It's a spectacle. Politics is a spectacle. Dumbledore knows that. It's time I learned it too." He spent the rest of the day preparing. Not speeches, he tried writing a speech and it came out wooden and false, so he scrapped it. Instead, he walked through Diagon Alley. Talked to people. Not as Lord Potter, not as the boy who lived, but as the bloke who owned the street and wanted to know if people were willing to show up tomorrow and be counted. The response was overwhelming. Madame Malkin, who'd been skeptical from the start, listened to his request and said, "My grandmother's shop was destroyed in the First War because nobody bothered to protect this alley." "You bothered. I'll be there." Tom the barkeeper, who'd been wringing his hands since day one, said, "I've kept my head down for 50 years. I'm tired of keeping my head down. Tell me where to stand." The owner of Flourish and Blots, Marcus Greenwood, Harry finally learned, said, "I'll close the shop for the day. My staff too. We'll fill a whole row." By evening, Harry had commitments from over 60 shopkeepers and their families. Daphne organized transportation. Ron handled logistics. Hermione prepared a legal brief so comprehensive that Augusta said it was the finest piece of legal work she'd seen from someone who wasn't old enough to drink. And then, just as the sun was setting and Harry was finally sitting down to dinner, the floof flared and a house elf appeared in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place. Not Dobby, not Creature, a elf Harry had never seen, wearing a pillowcase embroidered with the Malfoy family crest. Lord Potterblack, the elf squeaked, bowing so low its nose touched the floor. "My master Lucius Malfoy requests the honor of a meeting. He says to tell you that he has information regarding the Dark Lord's plans for Diagon Alley, and that time is, his words, sir, of the essence." Daphne, who was sitting across the table, set down her fork and gave Harry a look that said "I told you so" without using any words at all. Harry looked at the elf. "Tell your master I'll meet him. Here. Tonight. 1 hour. He comes alone, and he comes unarmed. If he's carrying a wand when he crosses the threshold, the house wards will remove it. Along with the hand holding it." The elf squeaked, bowed again, and vanished. "Bluffing about the hand thing?" Ron asked. "Not entirely. Grip hook? The wards can be set to disarm visitors automatically. The hand removal would require a specific additional enchantment that I can install in approximately 40 minutes. Skip the hand removal. But make sure he can't cast anything inside these walls." Daphne was already clearing the table. "We need to control the setting. Kitchen table, 2 chairs. Minimal light. The fire behind you, it'll silhouette you and light his face. He's coming from a position of weakness and we need him to feel it the moment he walks in. When did you become a stage director? When I decided my talents were wasted on enchantment retail. She moved a lamp. Hermione, Ron, Neville, you stay in the house but out of sight. I want to be in the room. Why you? Because Lucius Malfoy will underestimate me. He'll see a Slytherin girl from a minor house and assume I'm decorative. That gives us an advantage. Harry didn't argue. Daphne's instincts had been right about everything so far. When Lucius Malfoy walked into the kitchen of number 12 Grimmauld Place, he looked diminished. It wasn't just the absence of his wand, which had been cleanly extracted by the ward the moment he crossed the front door. The elf who'd escorted him was carrying it on a small silk cushion, which was a nice touch that Griphook had arranged. It was something deeper. The Lucius Malfoy Harry remembered, imperious, polished, radiating wealth and contempt, was still present in the sharp cheekbones and the tailored robes and the platinum hair. But underneath the performance, the man was scared. Harry could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the careful way he moved, the fact that he'd come here at all. Lord Potterblack, Malfoy said, and the title was delivered without the sarcasm Harry had expected. Thank you for receiving me. Sit down, Malfoy. Malfoy sat. His gaze flicked to Daphne, standing by the fire, arms crossed, and then back to Harry. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't comment. Which meant he already knew, and had factored her presence into his calculations. I'll be direct, Malfoy said. I am aware that directness is not my natural register, but circumstances require it. The Dark Lord is planning a full-scale assault on Diagon Alley. Not a probe, not a test, a coordinated attack with the full force of his available Death Eaters, supplemented by Dementors and at least 2 giants. The kitchen was very quiet. When? Harry asked. Within the fortnight. The exact date is being withheld from all but his innermost circle, of which I am no longer a member. The debacle at the Department of Mysteries saw to that. Malfoy's composure slipped for just a moment, and what was underneath was bitter and afraid. He is furious about the wards. Furious about the failed probe. And furious about you, specifically. The boy who lived, who now commands goblin loyalty and defies both Dumbledore and the Ministry. You've made yourself the most prominent target in Wizarding Britain, and the Dark Lord does not tolerate prominent targets. So he's coming to tear down the wards and make an example. He's coming to burn Diagon Alley to the ground. The wards, the shops, the people inside them. He wants rubble and bodies. He wants the wizarding world to see what happens when someone defies him. Harry let the information settle. Beside him, Daphne's expression hadn't changed, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. And you're telling me this because? Because I am a pragmatist, Lord Potterblack. I followed the Dark Lord when he was the winning side. He is no longer the winning side. Malfoy held Harry's gaze. I watched you dismantle 20 Death Eaters through a ward line 3 nights ago. I've read the intelligence on your Goblin Alliance, your financial resources, your political maneuvering. You are 16 years old and you have accomplished in 1 week what Dumbledore failed to accomplish in a decade. You have built something that people actually believe in. Flattery, Malfoy. Assessment. I did not survive 20 years of serving the most dangerous wizard in history by failing to read the room. He leaned forward. I can give you the attack plan. Troop compositions, approach vectors, timing. I can give you the names of every Death Eater who will participate. I can give you the identities of 6 ministry officials currently under Imperius, including 2 in the Aura department. And I can give you the location of the Dark Lord's current base of operations. The last item landed like a thunderclap. In exchange for what? Daphne asked, speaking for the first time. Malfoy turned to her. Sanctuary. For myself, for Narcissa, and for Draco. Within the alley wards. The Dark Lord cannot reach us there. You want to hide behind the wards of the man whose life you've made miserable since he was 12 years old, Harry said. I want to survive. And I want my son to survive. Draco is 16. Malfoy stopped. The mask cracked, just for an instant, and what was behind it was a father's terror. The Dark Lord has given Draco a task. An impossible task, designed to punish me for my failure. If Draco does not complete it, he dies. If he attempts it and fails, he dies. There is no version of events in which my son survives the coming year unless someone intervenes. What task? Malfoy's jaw tightened. He has been ordered to kill Albus Dumbledore. Silence. Harry looked at Daphne. Daphne looked at Harry. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Draco can't kill Dumbledore, Harry said flatly. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't. The Dark Lord knows this. That is the point. It is a death sentence delivered as an assignment. My son is meant to fail and die as punishment for my sins. Harry sat back. He thought about Draco Malfoy, the sneering, bullying, fundamentally small boy who'd made Harry's life miserable at Hogwarts. He thought about the fact that Draco was 16, the same age as Harry, and had been handed a suicide mission by a monster. He thought about cupboards and manipulation and adults who use children as tools. If I agree, Harry said, this isn't amnesty. You don't walk away clean. When the war is over, you face a tribunal. Your crimes, the diary, the graveyard, the Department of Mysteries, get a full accounting. If the tribunal decides you've earned some leniency through cooperation, fine. But I won't promise you anything more than survival. Malfoy's expression flickered, surprise, calculation, and then something that might have been grudging respect. You're harder than Dumbledore. He would have made me a promise and then found a way to break it later. You're telling me the truth and letting me decide. Take it or leave it. I'll take it. Malfoy's posture shifted, shoulders dropping, some of the rigid control easing. The relief was palpable. The attack on the alley. It will come from 3 directions. The leaky cauldron, the far entrance, and from below, through the old tunnels that connect to Nocturne Alley. There are tunnels that haven't been used in centuries. The Dark Lord's people have been clearing them for weeks. Harry felt a chill. Tunnels below the alley. Below the wards. Do the goblin wards extend underground? Daphne's breath caught. I'll check, Harry said, already rising. Grip hook, he was out of the kitchen in 3 strides, shouting for the goblin. Behind him, he heard Daphne begin extracting every detail from Malfoy with the precision of a surgeon, names, dates, numbers, positions. She was good at this. Better than good. Griphook appeared from the study where he'd been working. The tunnels, Harry said. Nocturne Alley connects to Diagon Underground. Do the wards cover that? Griphook's expression went cold. The wards were designed to cover surface entry points and standard approach vectors. Subsurface access was not included in the original specification because, he stopped. Blinked. Because we were not informed of the tunnels. Malfoy says Voldemort's people have been clearing them. We might have days. The goblin's face twisted into something that, on a human, would have been murderous fury. On a goblin, it was worse. I will have a survey team in those tunnels within the hour. If they connect to alley foundations, we will seal them or ward them. Both, if possible. Do it. Wake Silvax. Wake whoever you need to wake. Money is not an object. Griphook left at a near run, which Harry had never seen a goblin do before and found extremely alarming. He returned to the kitchen. Malfoy was still talking, Daphne still extracting, her quill racing across parchment. Harry stood in the doorway and listened as Lucius Malfoy, Death Eater, aristocrat, the man who'd once tried to murder a 12-year-old girl with a cursed diary, methodically dismantled his former master's battle plan. It was detailed. It was precise. It was the work of a man who knew that his family's survival depended on the quality of his intelligence. And it was terrifying. Voldemort wasn't just sending Death Eaters. He was sending everything. Dementors to attack the civilians and create chaos. Giants to batter the physical structures. Inferi, reanimated corpses, to pour through the tunnels and overwhelm defenders with sheer numbers. And at the center of it all, Voldemort himself, because the Dark Lord wanted to personally reduce Harry Potter's alley to ashes. "He's committed," Malfoy said. "Fully. This is not a test or a feint. He sees Diagon Alley as the linchpin. If it falls, the public loses hope. If it holds." He spread his hands. "Then he has a problem he cannot solve with force alone." Harry sat back down. The weight of it pressed on his chest, not the fear, he realized, but the responsibility. Every shopkeeper, every family, every child in the alley. They were counting on him. They'd shown up, trusted him, believed in his wards and his promises and his ability to protect them. He couldn't let them down. "When can you have Narcissa and Draco here?" he asked. "Tonight. If you grant access through the wards. I'll do it personally. Griphook will key them in." He met Malfoy's eyes. "Draco is going to have to behave. Draco will do as he's told, or I will deal with him myself." "Fine. Daphne, everything he's told us. Compile it. I want it in front of the full group within the hour." Daphne was already organizing her notes. She caught Harry's arm as Malfoy was escorted out by the house elf. "This changes everything," she said. "The Wizengamot session tomorrow, it's irrelevant now. If Voldemort attacks the alley with that kind of force, it won't matter whether the Ministry approves of the wards or not. The wards will either hold and we win, or they won't and nothing else matters." "It matters," Harry said. "Because if we survive the attack, and we will, I need the political ground to still be solid under my feet. The Wizengamot session happens. Augusta does her work. We fight on every front at once." Daphne studied him. "You know, when I met you 2 days ago, I thought you were in over your head." "I am in over my head." "No. You're not. That's what's interesting." She headed for the door. "I'll have the briefing ready in 40 minutes. Eat something. You look like death. Charming as always." "I don't do charming. I do competent." She swept out of the room. Harry sat alone in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place, in the house his godfather had hated and left him anyway, and he thought about what was coming. Voldemort. Giants. Dementors. Inferi. The full weight of darkness bearing down on a single street because a 16-year-old had dared to build something worth defending. He wasn't afraid. He should have been, any sane person would have been, but the fear wouldn't come. In its place was something harder. Colder. The same thing he'd felt in the graveyard, facing Voldemort over his parents' shades. The same thing he'd felt in the Department of Mysteries, standing over Sirius's, no. Not the same. In the graveyard, he'd been desperate. In the Ministry, he'd been reckless. Now he was neither. He was calm. Prepared. Armed with 4 centuries of Potter magic, an alley full of people who'd chosen to stand with him, goblin wards that could withstand siege, and the certain, bone-deep knowledge that he was done losing people he loved because someone else decided he wasn't ready. He picked up his wand. The holly and phoenix feather hummed in his grip, warm and alive. "Come on, then," Harry said to the empty room, to the war that was coming, to the Dark Lord who thought he could burn it all down. "Let's see what you've got. Tomorrow, the Wizengamot. Next week, the battle. Tonight, he had work to do." Chapter 4, The Lord of Diagon Alley. The Wizengamot chamber was built to intimidate. Carved from black stone deep beneath the Ministry of Magic, it rose in concentric tiers like the inside of a coliseum, each row of seats higher than the last, so that anyone standing at the floor level had to look up at the assembled members like a supplicant before a court of gods. The ceiling was enchanted to show a night sky full of cold, distant stars, a reminder, Harry supposed, that the law was meant to be as eternal and impersonal as the heavens. It wasn't working on him. Harry stood in the public gallery, the uppermost tier, separated from the members' seats by a brass railing, and looked down at the assembled Wizengamot. 50 members in plum-colored robes, arranged in their factions exactly as Augusta had described. Dumbledore's people on the left, the Ministry loyalists clustered around Fudge's empty chair in the center, and the old families on the right, sitting with the territorial stillness of people who'd held these seats for generations and didn't appreciate being summoned for emergency sessions. Augusta Longbottom was in her seat, rigid as a sword. Remus, whose appointment as Black Proxy had caused a minor scandal that was still generating angry letters to the Prophet, sat beside her, looking uncomfortable in borrowed formal robes but with his chin up and his eyes steady. The gallery behind Harry was packed. 63 shopkeepers and their families, dressed in their best, filling every available seat and standing 3 deep along the walls. Madame Malkin had organized them with military precision. She'd served in the First War, it turned out, and her organizational skills were terrifying. They weren't holding signs or chanting slogans. They were just there. Present. Visible. Every Wizengamot member who looked up at the gallery saw the faces of the people whose safety was being debated. Daphne stood beside Harry, wearing robes so precisely tailored and so deliberately understated that they probably cost more than most of the Wizengamot members' entire wardrobes. She'd explained the strategy: look wealthy enough to be taken seriously, modest enough to seem reasonable. Harry was wearing his school robes because he didn't own anything else, but Daphne had charmed the Potter crest onto the breast pocket, and somehow that small addition changed the entire impression, from schoolboy to young lord. Dumbledore called the session to order. He looked, Harry had to admit, magnificent. The Chief Warlock's robes were deep purple trimmed with gold, and his presence filled the chamber the way a bonfire fills a room. You couldn't ignore it even if you tried. His voice was calm, measured, carrying effortlessly to every corner of the space. "We are convened in emergency session to address a matter of public safety," Dumbledore said. "The recent erection of privately controlled wards over Diagon Alley, a commercial zone of critical importance to our community, raises questions that this body must address." He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't acknowledge Harry's presence. The omission was deliberate and effective. It made Harry a spectator rather than a participant. "The question before us," Dumbledore continued, "is not one of property rights. The rights of Lord Potterblack to his family's property are not in dispute. A gracious concession, designed to seem reasonable. The question is whether a single private citizen, however well-intentioned, should exercise unilateral control over a space that serves as the commercial and social heart of Wizarding Britain. The Flue Regulation Act of 1952 established the principle that certain assets, while privately originated, become so essential to public function that they require public oversight." He made the argument beautifully. Of course he did. Each point was delivered with the gentle authority of a man who only wanted what was best, who understood the complexity, who respected all perspectives while guiding the assembly toward the obviously correct conclusion. It was a masterclass in persuasion, and Harry watched it with the cold appreciation of someone studying an opponent's technique. Augusta was first to respond. She rose from her seat with the deliberate gravity of a woman who'd been doing this longer than most of the other members had been alive. "The Chief Warlock presents a compelling analogy," she said. "Diagon Alley and the Flue network. Both essential. Both, he argues, requiring oversight. Let us examine that analogy." She paused. Let the silence build. The Flue network was developed by the Ministry itself, using public funds, on public land. Diagon Alley is a private property, privately maintained, that has been in the Potter family for over 400 years. The comparison is not merely flawed, it is fictitious. Murmuring from the old families section. Nods. Furthermore, Augusta continued, the chief warlock suggests that public oversight is needed for safety. Let us discuss safety. 3 nights ago, Death Eaters attacked Diagon Alley. 23 of them. The privately erected wards, the ones this body is being asked to dismantle, repelled the attack without a single civilian casualty. Not one. She turned to face Dumbledore directly. When was the last time the Ministry's security provisions achieved a comparable result? More murmuring. Some of it uncomfortable, the Ministry loyalists shifting in their seats. I would also note, Augusta said, her voice dropping to a register that was somehow more devastating for its quietness, that the chief warlock has a personal interest in this matter that has not been disclosed to the body. Lord Potterblack's wards specifically exclude the Order of the Phoenix, an organization that the chief warlock leads. The order was operating from Lord Potterblack's property without his knowledge or consent, funded by unauthorized withdrawals from his accounts. These facts are now public, documented, and authenticated by Gringotts. The chief warlock is not a neutral party in this debate. He is a party with a grievance. The chamber erupted. Not shouting, the Wizengamot was too dignified for that, but a roar of whispered conversation that had the same effect. Dumbledore's composure held, but Harry saw the tightening around his eyes. The hit had landed. Amelia Bones rose from the center section. Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, square-jawed and formidable, she was one of the few Ministry officials Harry genuinely respected. Lady Longbottom raises valid points, Bones said. I would add one more. The emergency provisions being proposed today would set a precedent that extends far beyond Diagon Alley. If this body grants the Ministry authority to override private property protections in the name of public safety, every private ward in Britain becomes subject to governmental review. Every family estate. Every protected residence. Every goblin-secured vault. She let that sink in. The old families went very still. I have concerns about the concentration of critical infrastructure in private hands, Bones continued. Those concerns are legitimate. But the solution is not to hand the Ministry a blank check to dissolve private wards. Not when the Ministry itself has failed, comprehensively and repeatedly, to protect its own citizens. She looked at Fudge's empty chair. The Minister had, predictably, not shown up. I propose we table the emergency provisions and instead establish a joint review committee, private stakeholders, Ministry representatives, and Gringotts, to develop mutually agreeable security standards. This committee would have no override authority. It would advise. Nothing more. It was a compromise, and it was brilliant. Bones had given the moderates something to vote for that wasn't Dumbledore's power grab. Augusta caught Harry's eye from the floor and gave the tiniest nod. This was better than they'd hoped. Dumbledore recognized the shift. Harry could see it in the way the old man's posture changed, still commanding, still authoritative, but with the almost imperceptible adjustment of a man who knew the votes weren't there. I accept Madame Bones's proposal as a reasonable alternative, Dumbledore said graciously. Because that was what Dumbledore did, when he couldn't win, he positioned himself as the reasonable voice who'd been willing to compromise all along. Shall we vote? The vote was decisive. Bones's committee proposal passed with 41 votes. Dumbledore's emergency provisions were tabled indefinitely with only 7 votes in favor, his most loyal adherents, who would have voted for anything he proposed. The gallery erupted. Not with the restrained murmuring of the Wizengamot floor, with actual, full-throated cheering. Madame Malkin was on her feet. Tom the barkeeper was clapping so hard his hands were red. Marcus Greenwood from Flourish and Blots had tears on his face, which he was pretending were caused by dust. Harry didn't cheer. He stood at the gallery railing, looking down at the chamber floor, and his eyes found Dumbledore's. The old man looked up at him. For a long, suspended moment, they regarded each other across the distance, the chief warlock in his magnificent robes, the boy in the gallery in his school uniform with a crest on the pocket. Dumbledore inclined his head. Just slightly. An acknowledgement. Harry didn't nod back. He held the gaze, steady, until Dumbledore looked away. Then he turned to Daphne and said, "We have maybe 10 days before Voldemort attacks. Let's not waste them." The days that followed compressed into something that didn't feel like time, it felt like momentum. A great machine spinning up, every gear catching, every piece clicking into place with the frantic precision of a clockwork running at double speed. The tunnels were worse than Malfoy had described. Griphook's survey team found seven separate passages connecting the Nocturne Alley sublevels to the foundations beneath Diagon Alley. 2 had been recently cleared, shored up with timber, and marked with dark magic sigils that made the goblin surveyors physically ill. The Death Eaters had been working on this for weeks, maybe months. A subterranean invasion route, invisible from the surface. Sylvax sealed 3 of the tunnels outright, collapsed them with controlled demolition charges that the goblins handled with the cheerful competence of a people who'd been mining for millennia. The remaining 4 were warded and trapped. Not just sealed but turned into killing corridors, narrow passages rigged with cascading ward traps, the gauntlet configuration that Sylvax had described, layered 7 deep. Anything that entered those tunnels without authorization would face disorientation, gravity inversion, electrical discharge, and 4 other unpleasantnesses that Sylvax described with the clinical detachment of a true artisan. If they send Inferi through the tunnels, Sylvax said, reviewing the completed work with Harry on day 4, the first layer will disorient them. The second layer will invert gravity and pin them to the ceiling. The third layer will set them on fire. We did not technically need the 4th through 7th layers, but, she paused. Goblin craftsmanship does not do things by halves. How long will it hold? Against Inferi? Indefinitely. Against a determined wizard strike team? Hours. Against the Dark Lord himself? She met his eyes. Unknown. We have never tested goblin wards against the kind of magic he wields. The theoretical models suggest our wards will hold. Theory, however, does not bleed. The surface wards were upgraded to full gauntlet specification by day 6. The golden shimmer that had been visible during the initial installation was gone, the new wards were invisible, which was somehow more intimidating. You couldn't see them. You couldn't feel them until you hit them. And when you hit them, you found out very quickly that goblin engineering had not been oversold. Fred and George tested the ward response by throwing one of their experimental products at the boundary. The ward absorbed it, analyzed it, and reflected it back with twice the force. The resulting explosion took out a section of fence in the Leaky Cauldron's courtyard and left a scorch mark in the shape of what George insisted was a rude gesture but was probably just random blast patterning. The wards are learning, Griphook said, with the tone of a father describing a gifted child. Goblin wards are semi-sentient. They adapt to threats. Each test makes them stronger. And the anti-dementor measures? Patronus ward stones. 12 of them, placed at intervals around the alley perimeter. They generate a continuous Patronus field, not a single conjured guardian, but a persistent ambient effect that prevents dementors from entering the warded area. The stones are charged with positive magical energy and will need to be refreshed every 72 hours. Who charges them? Anyone capable of producing a corporeal Patronus. Harry looked at his people. He, Hermione, Ron, Neville, they could all produce corporeal patron uses, thanks to the DA training. Remus could. Luna, who drifted in and out of the alley over the past week with the serene purposefulness of someone who existed on a slightly different plane of reality, could produce a Patronus that took the form of a hair so vivid it seemed more real than the actual world around it. That was 6. 12 stones, 72-hour refresh cycle. They'd manage. The giant problem was harder. 2 giants confirmed, Malfoy said during one of the briefing sessions that had become a nightly ritual at Grimmauld Place. He'd settled into an uneasy residence in the house's 3rd-floor guest rooms, uneasy because Harry didn't trust him, and Malfoy knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. But the intelligence he provided was detailed and consistent, and Hermione had cross-referenced enough of it against known facts to confirm he wasn't feeding them disinformation. Narcissa Malfoy, who'd arrived the first night looking like a woman who'd walked through fire, had taken over the household management of Grimmauld Place with an efficiency that was terrifying. The house was cleaner than it had been in decades. Meals appeared on time. And she didn't say a single word to Harry for 3 days before finally cornering him in the study and saying, very quietly, "Whatever you think of my husband or my family, you saved my son. I won't forget that." Draco himself was another matter. He'd arrived at Grimmauld Place looking hollowed out, thinner than Harry remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a left forearm he kept pressed against his body as if hiding something. He didn't speak to Harry. Didn't speak to anyone except his mother. He sat in his room and stared at the wall, and Harry recognized the look because he'd been doing the same thing at Privet Drive a week ago. He left Draco alone. There would be time for that conversation later, if they survived. The giants, though. 2 of them. 15 feet tall, magically resistant, capable of smashing through stone walls with their fists. The wards would slow them. The gauntlet was designed to affect anything with hostile intent, but giants were notoriously resistant to magical effects. Silvax estimated the wards would hold a giant for 60 seconds at most before it powered through by sheer mass. 60 seconds is enough, Neville said. He was at the briefing table, surrounded by plant samples in various stages of alarming growth. "I've been cultivating something." He set a pot on the table. Inside was a plant that looked, at first glance, like an ordinary vine, green, leafy, unremarkable. Then it moved. The vine shifted in its pot, coiling and uncoiling with a muscular fluidity that was distinctly animal. "Modified venomous tentacula," Neville said. "Crossbred with Chinese chomping cabbage and something Professor Sprout calls Titan's Bane, a plant that only grows in volcanic soil and has a tensile strength greater than steel cable." He tapped the pot. The vine shot upward, wrapped around a ceiling beam, and squeezed. The beam groaned. One vine can exert enough force to restrain a small dragon. "I've grown 40. If we plant them along the alley perimeter, anchored to the ward stones, they'll activate on contact with anything larger than a human." Ron stared at the vine. "Neville, that's beautiful." "It's not beautiful at all. It's a biological weapons system that smells like rotting cabbage." He grinned. "But thank you." Hermione, meanwhile, had been working on the legal angle with the ferocity of someone who'd realized that law was just another form of magic, words arranged in the right order to make things happen. Her formal complaint to the Wisingamot was working its way through the system, generating headlines every time a new detail leaked. The sealed will. The financial records. The guardianship violations. Each revelation eroded Dumbledore's authority a little more. The old man was losing ground. Not quickly, Dumbledore's reputation was built on decades of genuine achievement, and it wouldn't crumble overnight, but steadily. People who'd never questioned him were questioning. People who'd followed him blindly were opening their eyes. Harry found, to his surprise, that he didn't enjoy it. He'd expected satisfaction. Maybe even vindication. Instead, watching Dumbledore diminish felt like watching a building crumble, something that had been grand and necessary and part of the landscape being reduced to rubble. Dumbledore wasn't Voldemort. He was a deeply flawed man who'd made terrible choices for what he genuinely believed were good reasons. That didn't make the choices less terrible. But it made the unmaking of the man who'd made them something other than triumphant. Daphne found him on the roof of Grimmauld Place one evening, sitting on the tiles and looking out over the London skyline. She climbed up with the sure-footedness of someone who'd grown up in a building with a rooftop terrace and settled beside him. "You're brooding," she said. "I'm thinking. When you do it on a rooftop at sunset, it's brooding." She pulled her knees up. "What's wrong?" "Dumbledore tried to fool me this afternoon." I didn't answer. "Good. He left a message with Creature. Said he wanted to talk about the Horcruxes." Daphne went very still. "The what?" Harry told her. "Not everything, the full scope of what Dumbledore had shown him in those private lessons was too vast and too horrifying for a rooftop conversation, but enough. The diary. The ring. The concept of a soul split into pieces and hidden in objects, tethering Voldemort to life, making him functionally immortal until each one was found and destroyed. Daphne listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "How many?" she asked. "Dumbledore thinks 7. Including me." He touched the scar on his forehead. "There's a piece of Voldemort's soul in me. Has been since I was a baby." Daphne's face did something complicated. She controlled it quickly, but Harry saw the flash of horror before she locked it down. "That's why he kept you close," she said slowly. "Dumbledore. That's why he controlled every aspect of your life. You're not just a weapon, you're a target. The Horcrux in you has to be destroyed, and the only way to destroy a Horcrux is to destroy the container." Yeah. The London skyline burned orange and gold. Somewhere below, a Muggle car honked its horn. "He was raising you to die," Daphne said. Her voice was flat. "All of it, the Dursleys, the ignorance, the manipulation, he was raising a lamb for slaughter. Keeping you just capable enough to get to the end, just brave enough to walk to your death when the time came. That's my theory, yeah. And you're telling me this because if I die in this battle, or any battle, I need someone who knows. Someone who can finish it." Daphne turned to face him fully. The last light of the sunset caught her eyes and turned them almost silver. "You're not going to die," she said. "You don't know that. I know that you are the most annoyingly resilient person I have ever met. I know that you've survived things that should have killed you at least 5 times over. And I know that Dumbledore's plan, raise the boy, sacrifice the boy, destroy the Horcrux, is the plan of a man who's already given up. There is always another way. There is always a solution that doesn't require someone to die." Her jaw set. "We'll find it. Daphne, we'll find it. That's not a hope, that's a statement of intent. You have a vault full of Potter grimoires, a goblin nation that respects you, and the most stubborn research witch in Britain on your team. If there's a way to remove a Horcrux from a living host without killing the host, we will find it. And if there isn't one, we'll invent one." She said it with such absolute, burning conviction that Harry, for a moment, actually believed her. "Okay," he said. "Okay." She stood up, brushed off her robes, and extended a hand to pull him to his feet. Her grip was strong and warm. "Now come inside." Ron's made a tactical map of the alley that uses actual chess pieces and Neville's vines keep trying to eat the bishops. Harry let her pull him up. He held her hand for just a moment longer than necessary, and she let him. Then they went inside, because there was a war to prepare for. Day 9 dawned gray and cold. The kind of morning where the sky felt low enough to touch, and the air had a metallic taste that experienced wizards associated with large-scale magical activity. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. Harry was in the alley by 7, walking the perimeter. The ward stones hummed beneath his feet, he could feel them now, a constant low vibration that had become as natural as his own heartbeat. The Patronus stones glowed at their stations. Neville's vines, 40 of them, planted in reinforced stone troughs along the alley's edges, lay dormant, looking like ordinary decorative plants until you got close enough to feel the coiled tension in them. The shopkeepers had been briefed. Those who wanted to evacuate had been given portkeys to safe houses. Hermione had organized the logistics with her usual terrifying efficiency. Those who chose to stay, and more had stayed than Harry expected, had been given emergency protocols, defensive equipment from Fred and George's armory, and specific shelter locations within the alley's most heavily warded buildings. Gringotts itself would serve as the final fallback. The bank's wards made Harry's look like party decorations, and Director Ragnarok had formally offered sanctuary to alley civilians in the event of a breach. The Goblin security force was deployed and invisible. 75 warriors, armored in shadow-forged plate, positioned at strategic points throughout the alley. Harry couldn't see them, and he knew where they were. The Death Eaters wouldn't have a chance. Ron had established a command post in the back room of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, where his tactical map covered an entire wall. Chess pieces, charmed to move in real time based on ward sensor data, represented friendly and hostile forces. Ron stood in front of it with the focused calm of a general who'd been wargaming this battle for a week. 3 attack vectors, Ron said, pointing. The Leaky Cauldron entrance. The far end. And the tunnels. Malfoy says the tunnel assault comes first, inferi and lower-ranking Death Eaters, meant to overwhelm and distract. Then the surface assault hits both entrances simultaneously. Giants on the Leaky Cauldron side. Dementors on the far side. Voldemort himself comes through the Leaky Cauldron behind the Giants. Response plan. Tunnels are handled, Silvax's gauntlet will chew up anything that comes through. We station Neville at the nearest tunnel access point with 10 vines in reserve, just in case something gets past the wards. Far entrance gets Hermione, Luna, and the Patronus reserve. They hold the Dementors. The Goblin units handle any Death Eaters that make it through the gauntlet there. Leaky Cauldron entrance is the main front. Giants, Death Eaters, Voldemort. That's where you are. Ron met his eyes. That's where we are. We. Me. Fred. George. Remus. Ginny. He held up a hand before Harry could protest. Don't even start. We trained for this. Ginny's been drilling with Fred and George for a week and she's better than half the order. Remus fought in the last war. And I've been studying your grandfather's battle tactics until I can see formations in my sleep. We're ready. Ron, Harry. Ron's voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I followed you into a chamber with a giant snake when I was 12. I'm not sitting this one out. There was nothing to say to that. Harry gripped Ron's shoulder, and Ron gripped his arm, and they stood there for a moment, 2 boys who'd been friends since a train ride that felt like a lifetime ago, on the edge of something that would change everything. If things go bad, Harry said, get everyone to Gringotts. Civilians first. Don't be a hero. Mate, that's literally your job. Ron turned back to the map. One more thing. Malfoy says Voldemort will come personally. If he does, you're the only one who can face him. The Priori Incantatem effect, your wands are brothers. Nobody else can duel him effectively. I know. So when it starts, when the real fight starts, we hold the line and you take him. No distractions, no heroics from our side. We keep everything else off you and you do what you have to do. Harry nodded. It was a good plan. A simple plan. The best plans were. He spent the rest of the morning in the vault. Not for training, he'd done all the training he could. He went because his grandfather's portrait had asked him to, and because he wanted to hear a Potter's voice before what might be his last fight. Charles was waiting, along with a dozen other ancestors who'd clearly been discussing something important. They fell silent when Harry arrived. You look ready, Charles said. I feel ready. Is that dangerous? It means you've prepared and you trust your preparation. That's not dangerous, that's smart. His grandfather studied him through the painted canvas. There's something I want to show you. Something I debated showing you, because it's, well. It's the family's greatest secret. Charles directed him to a section of the vault wall that appeared to be smooth, featureless stone. Place your hand flat against it. Say the words I am the last. Harry hesitated. What's behind it? The Potter legacy. The reason our family survived when others fell. Harry pressed his hand to the stone. It was warm, like the obsidian door. I am the last. The wall dissolved. Behind it was a single room, small compared to the vastness of the main vault. It contained one object, mounted on a pedestal of white stone. A cloak. Silvery, fluid, shimmering with an internal light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. Harry stopped breathing. He knew this cloak. He owned this cloak. It was in his trunk at Grimmauld Place. That's the invisibility cloak. But mine is, yours is a fragment, Charles said softly. A piece, separated from the whole centuries ago for daily use. This is the original. The true cloak of invisibility. One of the 3 deathly hallows. The room was very quiet. The cloak shimmered on its pedestal, and Harry felt something reaching for him, not physically, but magically. A resonance. A recognition. The story of the 3 brothers, Harry whispered. It's real. The story is allegory. The hallows are real. The cloak has been in the Potter family since Ignotus Peveril, our ancestor, crafted it. The fragment your father used, the one you carry, retains the invisibility function but not the deeper magic. The true cloak does more than make you invisible. It makes you untouchable. No spell can penetrate it. No curse can find you beneath it. Not even the killing curse. Harry reached out and touched the cloak. It flowed over his hand like water, like moonlight, like something that existed at the boundary between the physical and the divine. Power thrummed through him, not aggressive, not hot, but absolute. A perfect, impenetrable silence that wrapped around him and made the rest of the world irrelevant. Not even the killing curse, Harry repeated. Death himself cannot claim the wearer of the true cloak. That was the whole point of the story, the 3rd brother, the wisest, who greeted death as an equal. Charles's voice was gentle but serious. It won't make you invincible in battle, Harry. It won't fight for you. But it will keep you alive long enough to fight for yourself. Harry lifted the cloak from its pedestal. It weighed nothing. It was the most powerful object he'd ever held, and it felt like coming home. Why didn't Dad use this? Against Voldemort, the night because your father had the fragment, not the original. The original was in the vault. He didn't know, I died before I could tell him, and my portrait wasn't installed here until after. Old grief crossed Charles's painted face. It is the greatest regret of my existence. If James had known, he'd be alive. Yes. Harry folded the cloak carefully and tucked it inside his robes, against his chest. He could feel it there, a warmth, a presence, like a hand resting over his heart. Thank you, he said to his grandfather. Win, Charles said. That's all the thanks I need. The attack came at twilight. Later, the survivors would argue about who saw it first, the giants emerging from the fog at the leaky cauldron end, or the dementors descending from the darkening sky at the far entrance, or the ground itself trembling as things moved in the tunnels beneath. But Harry didn't need to see it. He felt it in the wards. A massive, coordinated assault hitting all 3 points simultaneously, exactly as Malfoy had described. The ward alarms didn't toll this time. They screamed, a sound that was felt more than heard, a vibration that reached into the chest and said they are here, they are coming, stand and fight. Harry was at the leaky cauldron entrance before the last echo faded. The golden ward line blazed to life, visible now, fully activated, a wall of light that stretched from building to building and from cobblestone to sky. Through it, he could see them. 2 giants. 15 feet tall, gray-skinned, small-eyed, carrying clubs the size of tree trunks. Behind them, in ranks, actual ranks, organized and disciplined in a way that Death Eaters hadn't been during the probe, stood at least 40 masked figures. And behind them, visible as a dark shape against the fog, tall and thin and radiating a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, Voldemort. Harry could feel him. The scar on his forehead flared with pain, but it was distant, manageable, like the ache of an old injury in cold weather. The occlumency he'd learned from the Potter grimoires wasn't the brute force approach Snape had inflicted on him, it was a subtle, layered defense that acknowledged the connection without being overwhelmed by it. The giants hit the ward first. They slammed their clubs against the golden barrier with enough force to crack stone, and the ward absorbed the blow. Rippled. Held. The giants roared and hit it again, and each impact sent shockwaves through the alley that rattled windows and knocked dust from cornices. The gauntlet activated. The first giant stepped into the ward line and the first layer hit it, disorientation, a spatial distortion that made the 15-foot creature stagger like a drunk. It swung its club wildly, smashing the wall of a building that wasn't there, an illusion, part of the ward's defense. The second layer caught it, gravity inversion, not enough to lift a giant but enough to make it stumble, fall to one knee. But Silvax had been right. Giants were resistant. The third layer, fire, washed over the creature's hide and it barely flinched. It was pushing through. Slowly, painfully, but pushing. Then Neville's vines hit it. They erupted from the stone troughs along the entrance like living cables, thick as a man's arm, fast as striking snakes, impossibly strong. They wrapped around the giant's legs, its arms, its throat. The giant roared, thrashed, tried to rip them free. The vines tightened. More came, and more, until the giant was wrapped in a cocoon of green muscle that squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. The giant toppled. The ground shook. The vines held. The second giant saw its companion fall and bellowed, a sound that shook the remaining windows along the alley, and charged the ward line with both hands raised. It hit the gauntlet at full speed and powered through the first 3 layers by sheer mass, emerging on the alley side burned and staggering but upright. Ron's voice, amplified by a sonorous charm, second giant through. Goblin units 4 and 5, engage. Fred, George, now. The twins' contribution was characteristic. 24 portable swamps, modified for maximum viscosity, detonated simultaneously beneath the giant's feet. The creature plunged knee-deep into a bog that hadn't existed 3 seconds ago, its momentum arrested, its balance destroyed. As it flailed, the goblin warriors swarmed, not attacking the giant directly but targeting its ankles with goblin-forged blades that cut through hide like parchment. The giant screamed and went down, and Neville's remaining vines finished the job. 2 giants. Both down. 30 seconds. But the Death Eaters were coming. They'd seen the giants fall and they were pouring through the ward line in force, accepting the punishment of the gauntlet layers because there were enough of them that some would get through. They came out of the golden light burned and disoriented but still casting, and the alley filled with the light and sound of combat. Harry didn't wait for them to organize. He stepped forward and the Potter battle magic sang through his blood. The first Death Eater through the ward met Harry's spiraling reducto and went down in a shower of cobblestone shrapnel. The second caught a shield cascade that reflected his own killing curse back at him. He dodged, barely, and Harry followed up with a concussive blast that threw the man 20 feet and into the ward line, where the gauntlet layers hit him from behind. The third, fourth, and fifth came through together, and Harry met them with a technique from the oldest grimoire, a wave of force, not a spell but raw magic channeled through will and wand, that hit all 3 simultaneously and scattered them like leaves. Ron and the twins were beside him now, and Remus, and Ginny, who fought with a ferocity that was almost frightening. Her bat bogey hex evolved into something that blinded and choked and left Death Eaters helpless for the goblin warriors to collect. Fred and George worked as a unit, one shielding while the other attacked, their movements synchronized by a lifetime of shared experience. At the far end of the alley, Hermione's voice rang clear above the chaos, expecto patronum. Her otter burst from her wand in a blaze of silver light, joined seconds later by Luna's hair, and the Patronus wardstones erupted in a chain reaction that turned the entire far entrance into a wall of blinding silver. The Dementors hit it and recoiled, screeching, burning, fleeing into the sky like dark rags caught in an updraft. Below, in the tunnels, the gauntlet was doing its work. Harry could feel it through the ward connection, layer after layer activating, the terrible efficient machinery of goblin warfare grinding through whatever was sent against it. Inferi, dozens of them, meeting disorientation, gravity inversion, fire, and things worse than fire, and being destroyed in the dark where no one had to see. The surface battle raged. More Death Eaters pushed through the ward line, taking losses, regrouping, pushing forward. They were disciplined, more disciplined than Harry had expected, and they were targeting the goblin warriors with practiced efficiency. The goblins fought back with the cold fury of a people who'd been underestimated for centuries, and the Death Eaters learned very quickly that a goblin in full armor with a forge-tempered blade was not a creature to be trifled with. Harry lost count of how many Death Eaters he dropped. The Potter magic flowed through him like a river in flood, not dark, not light, just powerful, ancient and precise and devastating. He cast without thinking, without hesitation, his body and his wand moving together in sequences his ancestors had perfected over centuries. Shield, strike, move. Shield, strike, move. The rhythm of combat, as natural as breathing. A killing curse screamed past his ear, close enough to feel the heat of it. Harry spun and saw the caster, a tall Death Eater with a silver mask, inner circle, moving with the grace of a trained duelist. The same one who'd led the retreat during the probe. The duelist threw 3 curses in rapid succession, killing curse, cruciatus, something purple and vicious that Harry didn't recognize. Harry's shield cascade absorbed the purple curse and reflected the cruciatus, but the killing curse couldn't be blocked. He dodged, rolled, came up casting. The spiraling reducto targeted the ground beneath the duelist's feet, Fleamont's technique, always the terrain, not the target, and the cobblestones erupted. The duelist jumped clear. Skilled. Very skilled. He landed in a crouch and cast again, a chain of curses so fast they blurred together, and Harry had to burn through 2 layers of his shield cascade to survive the barrage. They dueled. Properly, furiously, the way Harry had only ever fought Voldemort, trading spells at a speed that left the air between them crackling with residual magic. The duelist was good. One of the best Harry had faced. But Harry had 4 centuries of Potter battle magic in his blood and the unfair advantage of techniques the duelist had never seen, and after 30 seconds of savage exchange, Harry landed a combination that broke through, feint left, ground reducto, shrapnel spiral, and the duelist went down hard, his mask shattering to reveal the pale, pointed face of Antonin Dolohov. Harry stunned him before he could rise and moved on. The battle was turning. The ward line was holding, the gauntlet was depleting the enemy's numbers with every wave that tried to push through, and Harry's defenders, his people, his goblin allies, his friends, were fighting with a coordination and a fury that the Death Eaters couldn't match. And then the ward line went dark. Not failed. Not breached. Suppressed. The golden light flickered, dimmed, and went out like a candle in a hurricane, and the alley was suddenly open, no barrier, no gauntlet, nothing between the remaining Death Eaters and the street. Harry felt it happen. Felt the ward magic scream and go silent, crushed by something immense and alien, a force that didn't just overpower the wards but negated them. As if someone had reached into the fabric of reality and simply decided that the wards didn't exist anymore. Voldemort walked through the space where the ward line had been. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. The Death Eaters parted before him like water, and the air temperature dropped 20 degrees, and every light in the alley, the street lamps, the shop signs, the Patronus stones, flickered and dimmed. He was tall and thin and white as bone, and his red eyes found Harry across the length of the street with the unerring precision of a predator that had always known exactly where its prey was. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice carried without effort, filling the alley like fog. "You have built something impressive. I wanted to see it before I destroyed it." Harry stood alone in the middle of Diagon Alley. Behind him, his friends, his allies, the shopkeepers who'd chosen to stay. Before him, the darkest wizard in a century, flanked by his most fanatical servants, radiating power that pressed against Harry's senses like a physical weight. Beneath his robes, the true cloak of invisibility pulsed against his chest. Warm. Ready. "You're not going to destroy it," Harry said. Voldemort smiled. It was the most terrible thing Harry had ever seen, worse than the killing curse, worse than the veil, worse than the prophecy. Because the smile was genuine. Voldemort was enjoying this. "I killed the wards with a thought," Voldemort said. "Your goblin craftsmanship. Your ancient protections. A thought, Harry. That is the difference between us. You build walls. I unmake them. Then stop talking and come unmake me." Voldemort's smile widened. He raised the wand. Harry moved first. Not with a spell, with the cloak. He swept it from his robes and over his shoulders in one fluid motion, and the world changed. The noise of battle muted. The cold of Voldemort's presence dulled. The cloak settled over him like armor made of silence, and for one perfect moment, he was invisible, untouchable, beyond the reach of anything that wished him harm. Voldemort's killing curse passed through the space where Harry had been standing and blasted a crater in the cobblestones behind him. The Dark Lord's eyes widened, the first genuine surprise Harry had ever seen on that inhuman face. "The cloak," Voldemort breathed. "The true cloak." Impossible, it was lost. Harry let the cloak fall back from his head, visible again but still wrapped in its protection. "It was in my vault. Along with everything else you and Dumbledore tried to keep from me." He attacked. Not from the front, from an angle, using the cloak's protection to close the distance while Voldemort was still recalculating. The spiraling reducto targeted the ground at Voldemort's feet, not because Harry expected it to hit, Voldemort would dodge, but because it forced him to move, and movement meant reaction, and reaction meant he wasn't attacking. Voldemort dodged. Elegantly, contemptuously, floating aside as if gravity was merely a suggestion. He countercast 3 spells in the time it took Harry to throw one, and the air between them erupted with dark magic. Harry felt the cloak absorb 2 of the curses, just absorbed them, nullified them, as if they'd never existed, and dodged the 3rd. They dueled across Diagon Alley. It was nothing like their previous encounters, not the desperate scramble in the graveyard, not the clumsy wandlock in the Ministry. This was what happened when Harry Potter fought at his full potential, armed with his family's magic and protected by a Hallow, against a Dark Lord who'd never expected to face an equal. Voldemort was stronger. Harry knew that, knew it in the sheer weight of the magic being thrown at him, in the complexity of the curses, in the casual way Voldemort wielded power that would have burned out a lesser wizard. But Harry was faster, and he was creative, and he fought like a Potter, targeting the terrain, using the environment, turning every cobblestone and building and street lamp into a weapon. He brought a section of building facade down on Voldemort's head. The Dark Lord blasted it to dust and advanced through the cloud, and Harry met him with a shield cascade that absorbed 3 killing curses in succession, the cloak augmenting the shields, making them stronger, feeding them with the Hallow's ancient power. Voldemort's red eyes blazed. "You cannot win this. I am immortal. You're not immortal. You're just hard to kill. There's a difference." Harry attacked again. A combination from the oldest grimoire, raw magic, channeled not through a spell but through sheer will, a wave of force that hit Voldemort square in the chest and sent him sliding backward 15 feet, his robes smoking, his expression finally showing something other than amusement. Rage. Voldemort screamed, not words, just a sound, a release of power that shattered every remaining window in the alley and sent shockwaves rippling outward like a stone dropped in a pond. Dark magic erupted from him in a torrent, fiend fire, uncontrolled and ravenous, roaring to life in the shape of serpents and dragons and things that had no name, consuming everything in its path. The alley was burning. Harry didn't panic. The cloak protected him from the nearest flames, and his mind was working with the cold clarity of someone who'd been prepared for this exact scenario. The fiend fire was devastating, but it was uncontrolled. Voldemort had unleashed it in rage, not strategy, and it was burning in all directions, threatening his own Death Eaters as much as Harry's people. "Everyone to Gringotts." Ron's voice, amplified, cutting through the roar of fire. "Gringotts, now. Move." Harry's people moved. The evacuation protocol, drilled 100 times over the past week, kicked in. Shopkeepers ran. Goblin warriors formed defensive corridors, shielding the fleeing civilians from the fiend fire with their own bodies, their armor absorbing heat that would have killed an unprotected wizard. Fred and George were deploying every defensive product they had, creating barriers and distractions and pockets of safety. Neville's vines, resistant to magical fire, formed living walls that channeled the fleeing crowds toward the bank. Hermione, at the far end of the alley, was casting a containment ward, not goblin-forged, just raw magical talent and a desperate understanding of ward theory, that slowed the fiend fire spread toward the side streets. Luna was beside her, her Patronus blazing so bright it was like a small sun, burning away the darkness that followed in the fire's wake. Ginny was pulling a wounded goblin warrior from the path of a fire serpent. Remus was holding a defensive line with 3 other goblins, his wand blazing silver. Ron was directing everything, his voice a constant anchor in the chaos, and his tactical mind tracking 100 variables simultaneously. And Harry faced Voldemort across a street of fire. The Dark Lord had regained his composure. The rage was still there, but controlled now, focused. He walked through his own fiend fire untouched, of course he did, it was his magic, and his red eyes burned brighter than the flames. "Give up the cloak," Voldemort said. "Give up the cloak and I will let your people live. You'll kill them anyway. Perhaps. But at least they'll die quickly." He raised the U-wand. "Last chance, Harry. The cloak, or the alley." Harry looked at the burning street. At the people running, the goblins fighting, the friends who'd stood beside him when no one else would. At the alley he'd claimed and defended and bled for. He made his choice. He took off the cloak. Not because Voldemort asked. Not because he was giving up. Because the cloak protected him, and what he needed right now was to protect them. The cloak was a shield for one. What he needed was a weapon for many. He folded the cloak and pressed it against the nearest Patronus ward stone. The Hallows magic surged into the stone, through the network of stones that ringed the alley, and the Patronus field exploded outward, not silver but gold, brilliant and blinding, a dome of pure protective magic that expanded from the ward stone network and covered the entire alley. The fiend fire hit the dome and died. Not extinguished, destroyed. The golden light ate the dark fire like sunrise eating shadow, and the cursed flames screamed as they were consumed, actually screamed, a sound like a living thing in agony, and then they were gone, and the alley was clear, and the dome of golden light hung above the street like a second sky. Voldemort staggered. For the first time in Harry's memory, the Dark Lord actually, physically staggered, as if the death of his fiend fire was a wound, which Harry supposed it was. The fire had been made from Voldemort's magic, and the Hallow-augmented Patronus field had destroyed it utterly. Harry stood in the middle of Diagon Alley, cloakless, shieldless, his wand in his hand and his ancestors' magic in his blood. The golden dome blazed above him. "You know what the difference is between us?" Harry said. "You unmake things. I build them. And what I build, you can't break." Voldemort raised the U-wand. His hand was shaking, barely, almost imperceptibly, but shaking. Harry saw it and felt nothing like triumph. Only sadness. And resolve. "I will kill you," Voldemort said. "Today, tomorrow, or 100 years from now. I will kill you. You can try. You've been trying for 16 years. How's that working out?" Voldemort's face contorted. He raised the wand, and Harry raised his, and the street between them crackled with the promise of mutual destruction. And then a voice rang out across the alley, clear, commanding, ancient. "Tom." Dumbledore stood at the Leaky Cauldron entrance. Not as Chief Warlock. Not as the headmaster or the leader of the Order or the general or the chess master. Just as a wizard, old, tired, with a blackened hand tucked inside his robes, his good wand raised, and an expression on his face that Harry had never seen before. Humility. "This is not your fight, Dumbledore," Voldemort hissed. "No," Dumbledore said quietly. "It's his. I'm not here to fight. He looked at Harry across the burning, broken street. I'm here to ask permission. The alley went silent. Even the flames, what few remained, guttering in corners, seemed to quiet. Permission, Harry said. To stand with you. Not as your commander. Not as your guardian. Not as your mentor or your manager or the man who decides what you need to know and when you need to know it. Dumbledore's voice cracked. As a soldier in your army. Nothing more. Harry looked at the old man. At the guilt and the grief and the genuine, unvarnished remorse in those blue eyes. Dumbledore had come to the ward line, which his own banning should have prevented, and Harry realized that the ward line was down. Voldemort had killed it. There was nothing keeping Dumbledore out anymore. But Dumbledore had still asked. You should have asked 15 years ago, Harry said. I should have. I failed you in more ways than I can count, and I will spend whatever years I have left answering for it. But right now there is a Dark Lord standing in your alley, and I am very good in a fight, and I am asking, Harry, to help. Harry held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Dumbledore stepped into the alley and turned to face Voldemort, and the Dark Lord, for the first time in the battle, showed fear. Not of Harry alone. Not of Dumbledore alone. But of the two of them together, standing in a street that Harry had claimed and defended, backed by goblins and teenagers and shopkeepers who refused to run. The combined weight of it, the power, the defiance, the sheer stubborn refusal to break, pressed against Voldemort like a physical force. This isn't over, Voldemort said. No, Harry agreed. It's not. But tonight is. Get out of my alley. Voldemort looked at Harry. At Dumbledore. At the golden dome still blazing above them, at the goblin warriors reforming their lines, at the defenders who were bruised and burned but standing. He disapparated. The crack of his departure was like a thunderclap, and his remaining Death Eaters followed, those who could still stand, grabbing those who couldn't, vanishing in a cascade of desperate departures that left the alley empty of enemies in seconds. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. Then someone started cheering. Harry never found out who. It might have been Fred, or one of the goblins, or Tom the barkeeper who'd spent 50 years keeping his head down and had finally raised it. But the cheer spread, and grew, and became a roar that shook the remaining glass in the alley's windows, and Harry stood in the middle of it and let it wash over him. Ron reached him first, pulling him into a hug so fierce it lifted Harry off his feet. Then Hermione, crying and laughing at the same time. Neville, bleeding from a cut on his forehead that he didn't seem to have noticed, grinning the grin of a man who'd found his purpose. Luna, serene as ever, who patted Harry on the arm and said, the Nargles were right. You did change everything. Ginny punched him in the shoulder again. Don't ever take off a magical invincibility cloak in the middle of a battle again, you absolute prat. Fred and George were already surveying the damage with the gleeful energy of men who saw a rebuilding project rather than a disaster. Remus stood apart, his face streaked with soot and tears, and when Harry caught his eye, the werewolf mouthed 2 words, thank you. And Daphne. Daphne was standing by the ruined entrance to her family's shop, arms at her sides, looking at Harry with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Her hair was down, come loose in the fighting, and her robes were burned at the edges, and for once in her life she didn't seem to have a single strategic thought in her head. Harry walked over to her. She looked up at him. The shop's going to need repairs, she said. Her voice was steady but her hands were shaking. I know a guy. He owns the building. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and then she did something that surprised them both. She stepped forward and kissed him. Brief, fierce, not romantic so much as defiant, a kiss that said we're alive and I'm glad and don't you dare make a thing of it. Don't read into that, she said, stepping back. I'm in shock. Wouldn't dream of it. Good. We have an alley to rebuild. She turned on her heel, and the strategic mind was already spinning back up. Grip hook. Damage assessment. I want numbers by morning. Harry watched her go. Then he turned to face Dumbledore, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the celebration, waiting. They looked at each other. Two wizards in a ruined street, with the golden dome of Hallowlight fading slowly above them like the last glow of sunset. The wards will need to be rebuilt, Dumbledore said. Silvax is already on it. The Horcruxes still need to be destroyed. I know. I've been researching alternatives to your original plan. The one where I die. Dumbledore flinched. Harry, we'll talk about it. Later. When I've had a chance to sleep and you've had a chance to think about what asking looks like instead of telling. Harry extended his hand. But for now, thank you. For showing up. For asking. Dumbledore took his hand. His grip was firm, his blackened hand hidden in his sleeve, his blue eyes bright with emotions that Harry suspected the old man hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. I am sorry, Dumbledore said. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know that I am sorry. It doesn't fix anything, Harry agreed. But it's a start. They stood there for a moment, not mentor and student, not general and soldier, not chess master and pawn. Just two people who'd survived something terrible and were willing to try to find something better. Then Harry let go and walked down the alley. His alley. Past the damaged shopfronts that would be repaired, past the crater where the Fiendfire had been born and died, past the ward stones that were already humming again as the goblin teams began their work. Past Gringotts, where Director Ragnarok stood on the white marble steps with his arms crossed and a smile on his ancient face that spoke of respect between equals. He walked to the center of Diagon Alley and stopped. The cobblestones were cracked and scorched and beautiful, and the evening sky above was clearing, the dome of golden light fading to reveal real stars, cold and distant and eternal. Ron appeared at his right side. Hermione at his left. Neville behind him. Daphne, already barking orders at someone, within arm's reach. Ginny, the twins, Remus, Luna, all of them, his people, the ones who'd chosen to stand when standing was the hardest thing in the world. Harry looked up at the stars over his alley and breathed. It wasn't over. Voldemort was still out there. The Horcruxes still needed destroying. The political battles would continue. The Ministry would meddle. Dumbledore would need watching. And somewhere in the house on Grimmauld Place, a Malfoy family was starting a new life under the protection of a boy they'd spent years tormenting, and that was going to be complicated in ways Harry couldn't even imagine yet. But the alley stood. The people in it were safe. The wards were going back up, stronger than before. And Harry Potter, orphan, cupboard dweller, weapon, pawn, was none of those things anymore. He was the Lord of Diagon Alley. And he was just getting started.